About 3 months ago, I was babysitting my younger siblings while my parents were out. It was around 8 p.m. and everyone was in the living room watching TV while I was in my room folding laundry. No, my room was located at the back of the house. While I was putting the clothes away, I hear a knock on my window. Without thinking, I opened my blinds a little, and instantly, my soul left my body when I was face to face with a pair of wide hazel eyes staring back at me. I let out an ear-piercing scream and ran back to the living room to grab my siblings and take them to my parents' room to hide. While my siblings were confused and asked me why I screamed, the back door was practically shaking, as I could also hear someone banging on the living room windows. My sister was already on the phone with the police, and my brothers were hiding under my parents' bed, while I was in the hallway with a long kitchen knife, trying to somewhat protect them. Minutes later, the banging and shaking stopped, and I heard 2 people jump over the front yard gates. The police arrived 5 minutes later and took our statements. After the incident, my parents got us a dog from the local shelter named Buddy. 2 weeks later, I was alone at my house with the dog getting ready for school. So school started at 10 a.m. because the underclasses were taking exams and high school seniors, like me, came to school later. I was feeding Buddy when I hear the front gates shaking, then footsteps quickly next to my house. Then I heard someone trying to open my back door. Instantly, Buddy's ears picked up and he began growling and barking like crazy. I was about to call the police when I heard the person flee. Unfortunately, the police never caught the person, and I soon forgot what happened. About a week later, someone broke into my dad's car and stole his radio. Yesterday I was cleaning up the living room and decided to have some light in the house by opening the curtains. When sometime later, I see a truck slowly approach the house. I hid behind a bookshelf so that the driver wouldn't see me through the living room window. The truck driver's windows were really tinted and I felt the driver's eyes staring at me as if he knew where I was in the house. He sped off quickly after that. I honestly don't know what's going on, and I hope it doesn't escalate. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths that we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see or hear them coming from very far away and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not even arriving home until the sun was up. On one particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating the 2 sides of the lake. It would often sink under due to the rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was an extremely relaxing ride due to the amazing scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue and turn into a very close path that leads directly into the densely wooded wilderness. As we come up to the first hill, we look down at the bottom into the blackness. We noticed what appeared to be a teeny, moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, the small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that we had been accustomed to in the dark and silence. Acting purely out of fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of the hill, overlooking where we just came from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants in the darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other, and speculated on who these people could be. At first we thought they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through. and honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called at us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there. We could see you. Come out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. We clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smashed a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going in a different direction, down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us for what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights of the vehicles travel through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point he had started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach the furthest distance, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough away from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their locations on the paths, we would hide again whenever we felt like they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past while basically being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto an intersection of two main roads far from where we started. We ducked down into a ditch and called for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent calls from one of my other friends, Connor, who was supposed to meet up with us after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked him where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up with our plans despite us ignoring him, and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the two streets we were near and explained to him that we needed him to pick us up right away. He agreed to speed over to us, while Justin and I waited in hiding. Connor arrived before those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling at him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything we had just experienced. After we explained everything that had happened, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured that they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting we broke the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened, or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard the story. Some think that we might have walked in on a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started, we couldn't see. Our minds went straight to a chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought that we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. I had been sent to Korea from a university a few years ago. They told me that for my major, I had to go somewhere in Asia, and my friend had really talked up Korea for me. I knew nothing about it, and I decided, what the hell, I embarked on a semester-long trip. I only had one serious boyfriend in my life, who I broke up with a few months prior. I also didn't enjoy one-night stands, and wasn't digging the dudes at the clubs in Seoul. But I still wanted to have some sort of romantic experience, I suppose. So my friend recommended I use a dating app to meet English-speaking Koreans. That way I could meet someone and experience the actual dating culture. I thought I'm young, so why not? I was just so eager to have new experiences. Maybe it sounds dumb trying to date in a foreign country, but it worked out for me eventually, just not the first date. I met him on a dating app after being in Seoul about 3 weeks. Let's call him Tim. I still didn't know the culture or city very well and was a bit naive about everything. He eagerly wanted to meet me for a date after talking to me, and he seemed nice. I should have asked more questions. I should have also noticed that he wasn't giving me many details about himself. Tim was a bit older than me, but claimed that he was a college student. I assumed that he'd done a little bit of military time, since all men have to in Korea, and then returned to school afterwards. We talked for a bit and decided to meet up for a tea date near the school I went to. He wanted to come to my dorm originally to pick me up, but I lived in an all-women's dorm and didn't want him to know exactly where I lived since we were still strangers. So instead, I insisted that we meet at the main town center near the subway. He really didn't like this idea, which looking back at it was a major red flag, but eventually I insisted. The night of the date, I waited an hour for this guy. He was very late. Tim weirdly claimed he just wanted to make me wait. I thought he was kidding and messaged him a laughing emoji, assuming he was just lost. When he finally arrived, he was much smaller than I thought, but a man's height has never been something I care much about. He was also quite thin. Maybe I let my guard down because I didn't see him as a physical threat, which was a mistake in the end. Right off the bat, he was way too touchy with me and breathed creepy and heavily. I was so off put by his demeanor. I'm usually very tolerant with different personality types, but this was very odd to me. I had been told that most Korean men would be polite and not so touchy on the first date. He was also dressed oddly, like in business attire for a date, but I thought maybe it was a Korean thing. Again, I was dumb and knew jack shit about the culture. Then, the first thing he said to me was, "You're not as white as I thought you were." I thought this was a translation error, but his English was nearly perfect, so I asked for clarification. And he said what he meant. "I thought you'd be more white. Your skin is darker than I thought, and your eyes aren't as green. Are you pure European?" Now I was officially weirded out. First of all, I'm pretty much as white as you can get. I'm Irish and Scandinavian, so white as hell basically. So the fact that he thought that I could possibly be more whiter was funny. And why the hell did he care in the first place, anyway? Why does my skin color matter to this guy, and why is he bringing it up? He said about 3 times on the date how he wished my eyes were greener, and every time I would just reply, "Well, maybe my online photos make me look brighter," and brushed it off as him being nervous and trying to start conversation. Isn't it funny, the dumb excuses you make when you're panicked? When we arrived at the tea place, I tried to order a basic raspberry tea, and he stopped me and told me I had to order a special tea. I thought it was weird that he wanted to choose my tea for me, but in my head I brushed it off once again. He really insisted I only drink this tea type, and I just agreed. These small details become weirder later. After tea, he asked me if he could look around my school. It was dark out, but my school was very well lit, so I agreed, and the whole time we were walking around, he would randomly stop and grab me for long hugs. At first I let it happen, but then I stopped him, and he just kept trying. He kept grabbing me and breathing hard onto my neck. It was so awkward. He also would not tell me any personal details about himself. I asked so many questions, desperately trying to distract from the awkward grabbing and trying to get to know him, but he would never tell me anything. Even said at one point, "I'm a mysterious man," like a movie line. He also said something like, "You look so much like my favorite movie character," and I asked him who, but he said I would have to figure it out on my own. Finally he said, "I want to go into a dark area," and in my head I screamed hell no. At this point I wanted this date to be over fast. He somehow knew that there was a wooded area behind my campus, and he said we should go there. I said no, and that I just wanted to stay near the main campus and town, but he kept pushing. Finally he grabbed my arm and started dragging me there. He said, "I can't let anyone see," and I started to panic. I finally ripped my arm away and just demanded we leave and go back to the main road immediately. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't ask for help or get angry. Maybe I was scared, but I just began to book it back to the main road, and he followed. We ended up in front of a hospital near the center of town, and I told him it was time for him to go. I made some excuse, and he was pleading with me to stay. I told him that we could meet up the next day, which I lied, and that I would message him. I just wanted to get away from him at this point. I was pretending that it was all okay, just so he would leave. Suddenly, I think he's leaning in to kiss me, and I immediately think, oh god no. But it was so much worse. Instead, I feel a pain in my face. It takes me a second to realize that he's biting my face. It was like a dog. I had never felt this sensation before. He leaned his head sideways and bit me on the nose and cheek as hard as he could. I screamed and pushed him away. His face looked so freaky, and I barely had time to react in words. Instead, I ran up to the sidewalk until I saw the convenience store on the right. I ran to the back of the store and bent down and started crying. The 2 men who owned the store started yelling at me, but I couldn't explain my situation. I begged him in English to let me stay. I ended up having to buy a popsicle to stick around. I wish I learned more Korean by then. I guess Tim didn't follow me. I peered outside the store and didn't see him. I texted my friend and waited for them to get me to take me back to the dorm. On the way back, I messaged Tim and basically told him to stay away from me. I told him he was a creep and that he shouldn't bite women, and something along the lines of me calling the police, and then I blocked him. I was so scared to walk around my school after that. I was so afraid that he would find me somehow. I'm so thankful I never let him pick me up at my dorm. I called my mom to tell her what happened when she suddenly said, "Wait, what did he ask you?" She then put some details together and realized that all of these weird things had to do with the 50 Shades of Grey books. At first I thought she was just being silly and overthinking a bad date. I thought she was joking, but oh god, she was right. She had recently seen the movie or read the book or something and knew the details. The eye color, the way he dressed, and the tea he made me drink, and the random lines he said. It all matches the books and the movies. For his dirty little fantasy. My mom thinks he picked me because I look like the girl in the movie. It explains why he was fixated on my appearance and his whole thing with biting and trying to dominate me. Even if it wasn't his intention, I later learned that there are a few creeps who seek out foreign girls to dominate and have sex with them like a prize. They call it riding the white horse or something along those lines. On a happier note, this bad experience didn't stop me. I eventually met someone else in Korea and ended up falling in love. We even did the whole long distance thing, and now I'm living in Korea, studying and working. I hope to get married soon, so I guess I didn't let this bad creepy guy stop me from living my life. My name is Carrie. I won't be using real names of the other people in the story for personal reasons. It all started when I was 17. I had moved to this apartment complex with my mother and her girlfriend, and everything was going great. Then I met this guy, let's call him Bob. Well, Bob was sweet at first, then he started getting controlling and abusive. Well, I didn't know about red flags because I had never been in a relationship until I met Bob. So over 2.5 years, I thought it was okay, until someone told me that it wasn't. Well, the abuse went on until one day when we got into a huge argument and we went to his mom's house. I went into his mom's house and he went to the neighbor's. He was gone for a while when all of a sudden he came bursting through the back door and grabbed me by the hair, dragging me through his mother's house and out the back door. When he finally stood me up, I was standing at the edge of a fucking hole. Thank God for his sister, who heard him cussing at me and looked out her window. She saw what was happening and she came rushing outside to distract him so I could get away. I thank God every day that I got away from him. I was with him for 5.5 years before I was brave enough to finally run away. My parents and I are immigrants from the former Soviet Union, and money was tight living in Chicago. My parents worked a lot, and over the summer and on weekends I would stay with my grandparents. They were very good people. My grandpa taught me chess and walked with me daily. He was my hero. My grandma rarely left their apartment unless it was to go to the grocery store. She stayed at home cooking and cleaning. On one occasion of my staying over, I was a little girl at the time, maybe 9 or 10. My grandpa decided that he and I would walk to the zoo. I loved the zoo. I am an opinionated and headstrong little girl, mind you, and what happened that day changed me for the rest of my life. He and I were walking, and although I don't recall details, as it's about 20 years later, I do remember I got mad at my grandpa. I got so mad at him that I ran off and away from him. Stupid, right? My grandpa walked with a cane. He was a military man in the USSR, so even though he was an old man, he could take care of himself. Yet he was too slow for me. After I ran a bit, I stopped and I was on the sidewalk, and the neighboring road was busy. The zoo was not too far away. We had made this trip dozens of times, so I knew where I was going. I looked at the street and a gray 90s Taurus pulls up to the curb. The front passenger man sticks his hand out to me and says, "Hey little girl, you want some candy?" I look at him and notice that there's 3 men in the car. I was immediately weary, as alarm bells were going off in my head, that something was wrong. I shake my head no, and the man looks to my left behind me, and then the car speeds off. My grandpa was running after me, trying to catch up, getting closer by the minute. I realized right then and there that I was almost stolen. I stood there frozen in the spot, and my grandpa looked so relieved, standing next to me. I don't remember what he said, but he said something, and then we went to the zoo. Who knows what would have happened if my grandpa wasn't there? I might not be here, typing this, and just dead. This happened to me about a week ago. I found a summer job at our local supermarket, and about 2 weeks in, I got asked to work the late night shift, which was 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. I accepted it since I was in need of the money, and I never really slept early. Everything was fine and dandy until about 3 a.m. when a shirtless, scarred up guy came in the store. After lingering around the store for a while, he quickly came up to the counter, making intense eye contact with me. As I was about to ask him if he needed help, he whispered, "Don't you dare move." I didn't hear him at first, so I asked him if he could repeat that. At that point he got agitated and yelled, "Make another sound and I'll cut you up." In a swift motion, he vaulted over the counter, going to the alcohol section, trying to grab a bottle of whiskey. Thankfully, the owner hid a baseball bat under the counter. The moment he turned his back to me, I took the bat and swung it at full force at his knee. He winced in pain and tried to get up. I winded up the bat again, acting like I was going to hit him again, just to see him pull out a homemade shiv or some shit. I let him get up, and the moment he got up, he swung his shiv at me, lightly cutting my wrist. I pushed him back with a bat, and he ran for the door and got out. Later that morning, we called the cops and showed them the security footage, but they haven't contacted me since. I think it's safe to say I won't be working the late night shift again for a long time. I live in a boring little town in Florida. It's an uneventful place. So for fun, or maybe just out of pure boredom, my friends and I would meet up and take late night walks around our town. We would usually meet up across the street from these woods, right next to a small abandoned fire station, down the road from a gas station. On this particular night, my friend wanted to go explore this path that cuts directly through the woods. It was about 1 a.m. and I thought it might make for a cool adventure, so I was obligated. We crossed the street and make it into the mouth of the trail. I should mention that there was construction going on at the left-hand side of the woods, so it was fenced off, but the lights from the site slightly illuminated the trail, so we didn't really need flashlights. I had this uneasy feeling right off the bat, like we were being watched, but I chalked it up as being nerves and an overactive imagination. We continued down the trail, and I start to notice weird shit like branches breaking and leaves crunching just out of view. I tell my friend that maybe we should leave, and not 10 seconds later, the lights of the construction site shut off. Fucking great. But the moon was pretty full, so I wasn't too worried. We didn't walk that far, so I could still make it out of the mouth of the trail. We decided to walk back, and I felt relieved. Then I noticed it. Crouching down in a bush not 5 feet away was someone watching us. I tell my friend to run, and we book it, and I can hear this person running after us. We keep running, and eventually make it out of the woods and across the street. I turn back to look, and I see him right at the mouth of the trail. The dude was completely naked and looked insane. He has this glass bottle in his hand and throws it in our direction. He then grabs a rock and other things he finds on the ground next to him and starts throwing them as well. We make like trees and get the fuck out of there. We didn't stop until we made it to the gas station. That's when I noticed my friend was bleeding pretty bad from his arm. And he tells me that right after I grabbed him to run, something hit his arm. Upon further inspection, I noticed my friend had a huge piece of glass sticking out of his arm. He ended up needing 15 stitches. We called the cops and explained what happened, partially because we didn't want anyone else to get hurt, and partially because we didn't feel safe with that guy running around. When the cops searched the woods that morning, they found signs that someone was living in there, and more disturbingly, bloody clothes that looked like it belonged to a little girl. I never heard anything about it since. When I was about 9 years old, I was on my scooter on my way back from the field by my house. Me and my friend used to hang around there a lot, but it wasn't a proper playground, so we would just make dens in the woods and play football sometimes. Anyway, my house isn't too far away from the field, but between the two areas, the quickest way back is through the alleyway that cuts through the woods and a few houses. I was on my scooter, heading back towards my house. As I'm going down this alley, a massive black van completely blocks the path ahead that turned out of an intersecting road. It completely blocked any way to pass, so the only way was to go back where I came from. I stopped dead in my tracks in front of the van, and the driver started rolling down his window. A man with glasses and beady eyes just stared back at me and began to talk. I didn't know him at all, and he certainly didn't live in our neighborhood. "Young man, can you help me for a second?" Me being the stupid 9-year-old that I was, thought he was asking for directions or something, so I responded, "Are you lost?" "No, but my cat's gone missing. Just come a little closer to the van for a second and I'll show you a picture." At this point, it clicked in my head what was going on. The fact that he wanted me to get closer to the vehicle struck so many alarm bells. Not just that, but I could see his arms ready at the van door to open it and grab a hold of me. I then realized how close I was to the van. I politely said, no, sorry, and just bolted down the alley. The scariest thing was, I could hear him opening the van door behind me. At that point, my heart sank into my stomach. I went from addressing this as a casual situation to full-on scared shitless. He didn't actually chase me, I guess, but I could tell he wanted to make the effort. I ended up taking the longer route all the way to the main road back to my house, and thankfully, I didn't see him drive past. I've never forgot this story, and it honestly strikes me now that if I had stayed by the door, he could have just yanked me, and I would have been gone. So I'm a 20-year-old girl, and it's like I'm just straight up creepy old man bait. I don't go shopping alone often because it makes me uncomfortable being stared at. So I usually go with my boyfriend just to make me feel better. On this occasion though, he was at work. Desperately needing some snacks, I headed to my local Kroger, a relatively large grocery store nearest to my house. This particular Kroger is arranged awfully, so I usually end up doubling back because I don't realize I missed something. Because of that, it makes it really obvious if someone is following you. I started on the left end of the store, just picking out some fruit, when I noticed this very old man in overalls staring at me. Not thinking too much of it, I smiled politely and just walked past him. After a couple minutes of shopping and looking around, I noticed this man is still pretty close. He hasn't picked up any additional groceries, so I'm getting a little uneasy and just walk away to the other end of the store to get some ice cream. Now I'm stopped, looking at the ice cream for a while because there are so many options. After looking for a while, this creepo comes over and starts staring at the ice cream directly next to me. At that moment, I decided I didn't need ice cream anymore, and I was done shopping. Mind you, the old man, after staring at the ice cream with me for 5 minutes, didn't get any. From there, I booked it around the corner and ran all the way to the end of the aisle, took a sharp turn, and hurried to the checkout. I got in line and then offered a random person about to check out the spot behind me. I figured this would give me some time. Believe it or not, the old man comes to the checkout stand behind the person that is right behind me. I start quietly talking to the lady checking me out and ask them to take a very long time with the old man because he had been following me the whole time. They just laughed it off like I was some dumb teenager and said, "Yeah, that's old men for you," when I was generally worried about my safety. At this point, I'm sure you're thinking, call the cops. Yeah, that's what my dad said too, but I just didn't think about it at the moment. After checking out, I ran to my car and started putting away my groceries as fast as possible. I had an entire cart to put away. I finally got the groceries in my car, and since I was eyeing the door the whole time, I saw the old man come out the doors and beeline for me. I slammed the trunk of my car, and he was waiting for me at the driver's door. I locked the car and ran across the parking lot while calling my boyfriend to see what to do. I'm crying, trying to get a hold of him, but he's at work and of course he doesn't see my call. At this point, I'm hiding behind a Kia Soul, hoping the old man walks towards me so I can quickly run back to my car. He does, so I jump at the opportunity, and I'm unlocking my car as I run. I jump into the driver's seat and zoom home. He watched me drive away while he was standing in front of his red sedan that was on the other side of the parking lot from where I was parked. I took tons of back roads to make sure I wasn't followed by that stupid creepy old man. I used to live in a small farm growing up, but as soon as I was 18, I moved out instantly, and let me tell you why. When I was 12, me and my best friend Zach, who lives down the road, used to go in the woods and play. Since we lived in the country, there was almost nothing to do. We would always explore and pretend to be treasure hunters. I used to always take my dad's old cowboy hat, and Zach would take a small shovel every day, but if there was bad weather, we would just play games on the Nintendo 64. We would always go a bit deeper into the forest every time we went in. We usually managed to find something interesting in the woods, like old coins, water bottles, some nice looking stones, and some other things. Yeah, you know, really lame stuff, but we were kids at the time, and we always thought of it as some sort of treasure. I had a small box under my bed that I put things that we found in it, and so did Zach. We had an awesome childhood, but then some creepy shit started happening over some time. One day when we were exploring the forest again, we came across a well. We got really excited, thinking we found something good, and we checked it out. But there was nothing special about this dry well. We pretty much got our hopes up for nothing. The next day was Friday, and when we got back home from school, Zach went back to his house and I went back to mine. Not long after having a snack, Zach was at my door. I grabbed my dad's hat and opened the door, and when I opened it, Zach was there with two other boys. They were much bigger than Zach. Zach introduced them as his cousins, saying that they were staying with his mom and dad for the weekend. Their names were Danny and Simon, 3 years older than me and Zach. They wanted to come with us to the woods, so I agreed. It was just a normal day for the most part, but Zach's cousins were total assholes, saying it sucked being in the woods and asking how we never got bored out there. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I got knocks at my bedroom window. It was Zach and his cousins. They told me to come down. I managed to get downstairs without awakening my parents. I opened the door and the cousins asked me if I wanted to go back to the woods. I had never been there at night before, and to be honest, I didn't want to go, and I told them that. And then they said, "You're lost." They went off in the direction of the tree line. I then changed my mind, grabbed my dad's hat, and ran after them. I caught up with them, and we started walking deeper into the woods, and I was scared shitless, and by the look of Zach's face, he was scared as well. The cousins stayed in front of us, shining their flashlights on the spooky trees. I noticed that we were going in the direction of the well. I had known that forest like the back of my hand, so I had a plan in case shit hit the fan. We were coming up on the well, and suddenly the cousins stopped and turned off their flashlights. We asked them what was wrong. They stood there like statues. Then we went around them since we were behind them, and I froze as well. There was a person standing in front of the well, not looking in our direction thankfully. I stood there like a statue, not knowing what to do. Then one of the cousins, I think Simon, whispered, "Turn around slowly and walk slowly. Don't make any sudden moves." I complied, and we turned around and started walking back slowly, so that the figure wouldn't notice us. Then something terrible happened. I stepped on a stick and it made a loud snapping sound, and we weren't far enough away from the figure yet, so we stopped again. We all looked back, and the figure was now looking at us. I almost fainted in fear, and Danny screamed, "Run!" We floored it, and I dropped my hat while running back, but I didn't stop to pick it up. I had no idea if this figure was following us, since our footsteps were all loud and I couldn't make it out. I didn't look back either, so I didn't know. We managed to make it back safely. I ran into my house and slammed the door shut. My parents were awake and I got yelled at, and I was grounded for a week, but they also looked really relieved. My mom hugged me and said, "I'm glad you're safe." I was confused and asked them what they were worried about. They told me something that made me even more scared. They told me recently an escaped killer was on the loose, and he was last spotted a few miles from our area. When my dad saw I wasn't in my room, since he would usually check up on me, and the front door wasn't fully shut, they thought I'd been kidnapped, and they were about to call the police when I came to the door. After hearing that, I started crying. My parents asked me why, and then I told them what happened. Their faces were full of horror after me telling them that, and then they called the police immediately. Later on, they arrived. I explained everything to them. They said that they would take a look in the woods, so they did. An hour later, they came back with nothing, but said the next day they would bring back more cops to search the area, and warned me not to go out in the woods again. I barely slept that night because I was so afraid that that man would come back again. The next day, more cops came to our farm and started investigating the woods. They also went to Zach's house. My mom came in and said that she found my dad's hat on the doorstep. Then I remembered last night, I had dropped it. How did it get there? I thought about it some more, and the man in the woods came to mind. I started panicking again. My parents calmed me down and asked me what was wrong. I told them about the hat, and they had a nervous look on their faces. My dad took the hat outside to the cops, and I managed to calm down again. And for the rest of the day I just played video games, since my parents grounded me. Around lunchtime, we get a knock on the door. I answered it. It was Zach and his mom. I told my parents they were at the door. Then they told us to go in my room and play something. I put my ear against the door and listened. Zach's mom told my parents that Danny wasn't in the house that morning. After hearing the news about the creep in the woods, she began to worry. One thing didn't make sense though. All 4 of us made it out safely. I was confused. Then Zach told me something that scared the living shit out of me. He said Danny had left the house when they got back. He left when Simon and Zach were sleeping. Although Zach wasn't really sleeping. Zach said he looked out the window and saw him walking into the woods. He wanted to stop him, but he was too scared to go out there again. And he never came back. I asked him why he left, and Zach didn't know. Then Simon came over a little later. I asked him if he knew why Danny had left the house. He said he had an idea. Danny always used to carry around his dead mother's ring with him. He always used to keep it in a box, and he would take it wherever he went. Simon checked the box in the morning and it was empty. He must have dropped it while running from that guy that night, he said. After that day, weeks went by. The guy in the woods was never caught. The cops started to investigate Danny's disappearance. He was also never found. And me and Zach never went back into those woods again. This happened to me when I was 14. Me and my family were camping in Crystal Lake, Azusa, California. We took off that day, so when we got there we could swim the lake, but of course we were delayed by traffic, so we didn't arrive until it was getting dark. Once we got there, we unpacked and finished settling in, and we wanted to light a fire and make s'mores. Unfortunately, there was no firewood because we forgot, so me and my cousin, being the adventurous teens that we were, decided to grab a flashlight and go seek for dry wood. My older brother asked if he can come with us, but we refused because we were trying to be independent. We walked down a forest path for about 5 minutes, not far enough to get lost. We found a spot where there was a whole lot of wood, almost like someone was collecting a pile and just left it there. But we had forgot a sack to put the wood in. I told my cousin that I would go back to get the sack from the van, and I'd be right back. I had an iPod, so I let him borrow it so he would be entertained while I grabbed the sack. It was a creepy walk through the forest alone, so I decided to run. After I grabbed the sack, halfway going back, I hear my cousin scream. I sprint towards him. When I get there, he had his head between his knees and was sobbing softly. I thought he was trying to pull a prank. But after asking him what happened, he put his hands on his mouth and pointed with his other hand. When I looked up towards the direction that he pointed to, I saw what I could only describe as pure terror. A lady in a bloody bride's dress floating, just staring at us. She never moved, just stared. She didn't have any eyeballs, just a weird glow to her. But I stared at her, and it finally clicked. What the fuck am I still doing here? I grabbed my cousin and pulled him up. I never ran faster in my life. When I got to the rest of the family, they told me that they heard a lady sobbing in the far distance, but we never heard anything. I explained what happened to us, and they saw the terror in our eyes to know that we were serious. I had a rough time sleeping, and we never did get any s'mores. My dad and I went hiking a few days ago. My dad is a waterfall fanatic and he wants to see as many as possible. So he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river. It's flowing nicely. There's mountains around us and the trail is weaving around big beautiful boulders. I'm about 30 feet ahead of him, looking for a spot to stop and sit down for a picnic lunch. As I rounded a blind curve on the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump maybe about 10 feet off the right side of the trail is a guy. He's wearing one of those colorful Baja hoodies with the hood pulled up and a half mask with bunny ears. He sees me and stands up right as my dad rounds the corner. We are both sizing each other up in silence. My dad addresses him. What's up, buddy? The masked man tips his head as if he was deciding what to do with us and says back, "Not much. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. Have a good day." Then he turns and jogs off quickly into the woods. Strapped to his lower back was a hunting knife, and he had a pistol on his hip. We lost sight of him pretty quickly. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we had been hiking for almost 3 hours. Needless to say, we left the waterfall for another day and quickly turned around. Once we were off the trail, we reported it to the local Forest Service and the police, but they said they couldn't do much aside from keeping an eye on any suspicious activity. The masked guy didn't have a backpack or water or anything, which makes me think he either stashed it somewhere or maybe was camping and waiting nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to go after the guy and ask him who he was waiting for and why. I go to Florida every year to see my cousins. When we were a few weeks into our vacation, my cousins started saying when they were at my cousin Logan's and Kelsey's house that they would see this little boy in Kelsey's dark closet at night. So being skeptical, I asked if I could stay so I could see for myself. I went there the next night. We set everything up and we were sitting in a dark room. They said I had to focus on the closet long enough to see it. At first I was confused because I didn't see anything. But then everyone realized that the doll on a swing in Kelsey's room, named Cricket, started rocking back and forth side to side, and that's a weird rocking pattern, and there was no draft. After that, I focused hard on the closet, then I saw it, and so did everyone else. A black shadow like a hand started reaching out from the closet, and it wrapped its fingers around the door. Then it disappeared and everyone stopped since they were so scared. I still to this day clearly remember the black, ghoulish hand. My friend had gotten a good deal on his first house, something like $100,000, really good for a small house. As soon as he moved in, something just felt off. He was living there with his girlfriend. The first encounter with the noises was when they were inside the house, moving in. My friend was going up to the attic to store some extra stuff that wouldn't fit and that they were going to pawn off later. As he was going up the ladder to the attic, he heard some scrambling noises. He went up there and it was hit with the terrible smell. It was a 20-year-old house, so he didn't really think too much of it. After we went down, he heard something in the attic. He just figured it was a rodent, and after a few weeks, called in an exterminator. A few weeks go by, and the exterminator is there. He goes up into the attic. He found a bunch of cocaine, heroin, and every drug you can think of sitting there. He called the cops, and they arrived to search the house. My friend was cuffed, and they searched the attic. They found a pipe in the corner, leading to his crawl space. My friend didn't have a crawl space that they knew of. The cops went back downstairs to search the house. They eventually found nothing. My friend took it upon himself to break the base underneath the house. He found a living space with his stuff from the attic, and a guy with long brown hair, a torn hoodie, and my friend's extra shoes. He yelled to the cops that were still up front and got the hell out of there. The man had a gun, or what looked like a gun. The cops wanted him to put it down, and he did. Then they took him off in cuffs. He was charged with illegal drug trafficking, and was sentenced to a few years in prison. It still creeps my friend out, even though he moved the heck away from there a few months ago, to know that some drug dealer was hiding in your house for months, with a gun. When I was around 15, I started babysitting for a family with 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl. The mom knew me as her oldest child, was friends with my little brother, and had asked my mom if I could help her because she had started taking on more shifts and her husband was doing the same. They lived right next to the high school, and they paid well, so I agreed, despite not having much experience. Pretty quickly I realized that this was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was nervous around them. The oldest was fine, just playing on his Xbox most of the time, or doing homework, but the 2 youngest were a different story. The middle child, daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies, and on more than one occasion, I had to hide knives from her since she wanted to reenact them, and the youngest son tried to set the Christmas tree on fire. I know what kids can be like since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones drove me insane, and I would consistently have to worry about them hurting themselves or each other. If they were acting up, I would threaten to call their mom, which would normally work. It was after a few months that I realized if I had mentioned their dad, that's when they would really start behaving and do what I asked them to do. Now, I never really met their dad, I just knew that he was the guy that was really tall and built, but was always described to me as still being really nice, and I never really thought about it. On this occasion, I said to the youngest boy that I'd call his dad if he didn't stop misbehaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum. So I ended up calling him and explaining. Lucky for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said he would be home as quick as possible and apologized for his kid's behavior. When I explained this to the kid started sobbing and ended up locking himself in his room. That day, the dad got home, and they weren't joking when they said that he was really tall. I'm only 5'3" and was 15. When I saw him having to crouch a little to get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking, oh shit, no wonder the kids don't misbehave when he's there. I said hi and apologized for having to call him at work, which he just brushed off and said that if it needs to be done, don't worry about it. We both sat on the couch. I can't really remember why, but I think we were talking about the days that they needed me for. Now, at this time, the two youngest had went outside to play, and I was with the oldest, as I had just tidied up a little bit from dinner. I was pretty weirded out because the oldest kept getting a little antsy when asked to go to the shop. He kept making up excuses to his dad, so I just offered to go. I could see that the dad was visibly frustrated and just wanted to defuse the situation. Now, I would like to point out that everything seemed normal at this point, but I do remember feeling intimidated by the dad. I had only met him this one time and spoke to him for no more than 20 minutes. It turns out that the oldest said to his mom that he didn't want to leave me alone with his dad, as he apparently had been watching me a little too closely during the short encounter. The parents asked me if I could babysit a little later that week, which I agreed to. However, in the space of a few days, that quickly changed. I got a text from the mom apologizing for the last minute arrangements, but saying I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I had changed my plans, but wasn't too bothered, and just said it was fine, and to just let me know if they need me. She asked me to come over to get my pay for the last 2 weeks, so I decided to stop by before going home. As soon as I got to the house, I could tell something was off, but I didn't want to pry. I went in and said hi, talked about books for a little bit, and then left. It wasn't until the next week, or the week after that, where everything kicked off. I come home to my mom being upset and angry, pacing in the living room while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately started asking her what was wrong, feeling a little worried. Instantly, she just threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I was supposed to be babysitting at the time, but again, got canceled on, so I was home earlier than I originally said I would be. Pulling away confused, I asked her what was wrong. Turns out, my mom had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit and nobody was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus, but wasn't able to let my mom know. She sits me down and starts trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I mentioned that I only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone a handful of times when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mom starts pressing on and asks me what else happened, questioning me, saying I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing had happened, and asked her what she was going on about. I remember her taking deep breaths and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, as I said, the details are vague because this was on the news. Turns out, the dad had killed someone while working and had been taken in by the police. During the interrogation, it turns out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there were other speculations of assaults. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls who had dark hair and were pale, which happened to match my description at the time, and my mom was terrified that something had happened to me. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me shivers. I remember feeling like I was going to throw up and had a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom held me close because she was worried sick all day and scared that something had happened to me. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for that family right then and there. I felt so sorry for the wife because she was honestly one of the nicest women I have ever met. About a week later, I got a text from her, and it turns out I left some books there, so I told her I'd come and pick them up. When I saw her, my heart sank. She had obviously not slept and was putting on a brave face for the kids, who weren't sure what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen, and I gave her a hug, just trying to comfort her. I had mentioned that if she needed help with the kids, since he was gone, I would try to help out, but she immediately refused. As it turns out, people had started attacking the house. She gave me my stuff, paid me my wages and a little bit more, and said that she appreciated it, but that it would be better if I just took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it still scares me after thinking what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids, and I even helped tutor the youngest girl. I helped the oldest when he started high school, because I noticed kids bullying him for what his dad had done, which was awful considering it wasn't the fault of the family. Just for some background info, I'm an 18-year-old male currently living in New York. I am 6'4" and rather well built. I've always been the center of ridicule and teasing from a young age due to my size. Just for some context, I stopped growing in the 9th grade, 4 years ago. I was already done with puberty and had a full-on beard and was adult-like. I took advantage of this sometimes, which led me to losing my virginity in the 9th grade to a girl who was in college. This story takes place when I was in the 10th grade. I was lonely after the breakup with my girlfriend, who I dated for 7 months. I was looking for a one-night stand, so I turned to Tinder. I set up a fake profile with my real picture and waited. There was this gorgeous girl who I matched with. This girl was too good to be true, which gave me my first red flag, yet I went along with it. We exchanged innocent messages and planned to meet up at her place the next day around 9 p.m. I wasn't as excited as you would think because I had some doubts on this girl because I didn't know if she was real. So 9 p.m. rolls around and I get ready to go to her place. I mentally prepare myself for anything crazy or disappointing to go down. Before I left, I texted my dad saying that I was going to my friend's house. I asked my good friend Isaac, who was 6 years older than me, to drive me since he had a car. He warned me to be cautious. Long story short, he drives me to her apartment and I ring the doorbell. I hear light footsteps behind the door and a high-pitched voice saying, "Be right there." I texted my friend telling him everything was fine and he was okay to leave. Boy was I wrong. The door opens to the girl in the picture. I immediately felt excited, which didn't last for long. On my Tinder account, I wrote that I was 24 when I was actually 15. She, not knowing this, swiftly asked me if I wanted a drink. I said that I didn't really want anything, which made her face visibly change from happy to pissed off. I found that really odd and came to the realization that maybe I was going to be drugged, and I was not about to take any chances, so I asked if I could go to the bathroom. She then out of the blue said sure, happily. Again, her weird response confirmed the theory in my head that something was off. I go to the bathroom and quickly text my friend to come back and pick me up. Then in the corner of my eye, I saw a figure dressed in black standing in the shower, trying to hide behind the curtain. I figured he saw me looking at him because not even after 2 seconds, he lunged at me. I was scared shitless, even though I was bigger than him. He tried pushing me to the floor, but had no luck. I overpowered him rather easily. I grabbed him by the shirt and looked him in the eye. He was around 5'10", mid-30s, well built, balding, and looked like he might be Eastern European or Russian. I pushed him to the floor and cursed him out. He tells me to fuck myself, which is when I punched him in his face. There I was, a 15-year-old idiot in a bathroom with a knocked out man. I panicked, but I tried to keep my cool and took out my phone, taking a picture of the man. By then, my friend texted me and told me that he was outside the building waiting for me. But also by then, the girl had opened the bathroom door and started to scream. I pushed her with all my power and sprinted the hell out of the apartment. When I got to my friend's car, I explained to him what happened. I only then realized that I could have been drugged, robbed, killed, or worse. I obviously took screenshots of her profile messages between us. Even though I had all the proof in the world to lock these assholes up, I didn't because I was scared of my parents finding out that I was lying to them. Moral of the story, be very cautious when dating online. In 2002, I was a 14-year-old girl starting freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl that didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack of making friends with weird people that no one really liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Unfortunately, that was also my downfall. Clubs were a very big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. First club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I have no clue what it is. He sat in front of me. Being the person I am, I said hi. I could tell he was uncomfortable and didn't know anyone, so I was just being nice. And boy did this guy cling to me after that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He has such a soft voice, high-pitched, that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke made it so I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more of him asking me about personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. After a while, my friends and I would move to different tables, benches, and even hallways to avoid him, but he always found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to fuck off, he would. I really didn't want him around anymore, so sure, go ahead. So one day during lunch, here comes Stalker Kid with his signature greeting, barely above a whisper. Hey. My buddy just goes, dude, she's not interested. Fuck off. Looking hurt, he shuffles away. I was like, man, you didn't have to be so hard on him. But, thanks. I didn't see him much around school after that, except for club days, where he would just sit across the room and stare at me, while my best friends glared at him. Fast forward to me being 16 and driving now, minus the awkward club days. I didn't really notice anything from him. That was until an old gray beat up car started parking next to me and extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in the car. He started asking me how I'd been and about prom and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew this was my car, and unless he had been watching me before and after school, I don't know how he would have. I started getting there later and leaving later to avoid him because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking around with me. He made a comment that the guy is always next to my car and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no and told him that he's always following me around and I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy, because he walked straight up to him and scared him off, threatening that if he ever parked next to me again, he would kick his ass. I figured maybe that was enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space of time where I would hear nothing from him, except from my friends who had classes with him telling me how creepy he was. One of my friends had art class with him and said he would draw naked women consistently in his books, all big busted and in sexy poses. Junior year is wrapping up and I started taking my best friend, Phil, to and from school. At some point, Phil started noticing that a little gray car was always heading the same way after school and made a joke saying, what if Stalker Kid lived right next to him? Haha, small world, right? One day, as usual, the little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us step by step the whole way, and it was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed the gas pedal as hard as I could and noped the fuck out of sight. I went home and told my mom everything, because at this point, I knew this wasn't normal. She shoved it aside, saying I was probably seeing things. Well, it came time for our end of year club party. Stalker Kid was a senior, so I would never have to see him again. For whatever stupid reason, I offered to host a party at my house, thinking he has never gone to one yet. I was terrified when my dad let him in the door. I don't remember giving him an invitation to the party. Someone else must have given it to him. He spent the whole party talking to me, my dad, being all buddy-buddy with him, asking me where my room was. I just wanted to cry and hide. It was all downhill after that. I remember there were days where I could hear a car pull outside my front door. In my room having the window that saw out to the front, I would call my buddy Phil and peek to see if it was him. 3 times in 1 month, I just hid under my desk and cried on the phone with Phil. Other events from school would be him asking a girl I played softball with to prom, only to dump her and follow me all night. This includes to and after the prom, where I never saw him in person. Our high school had a radio, TV channel for kids to run, and during prom, they would record us going up and down the stairs and playing around in the gym at after prom for the parents to see their kids having fun. It took one of my friends to point this out, but it showed me playing DDR for a while against my friend Phil, and Stalker Kid was right behind me watching for a good 5 minutes. I never knew. And the one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. Our classes were so big that they did a day and night ceremony, where all the students had to attend the day one. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course, it was Stalker Kid waving at me. How he picked me out of a crowd of 1,000 people, I'll never know. 2016 year was great. No signs of creepy Stalker Kid to the point where I started to forget about him. I graduated. I chose a college in town, get a job at the local retail store, and move on. Life is beginning to be normal. I work the gaming department, so you get the weird randos once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses. This would be important, and he never purchased anything, but would just walk around from time to time. Then, Stalker Kid comes strolling in the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I asked how he knew I worked there. He says his friend saw me and knew that we were friends. I tried to radio for help over and over for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks over and asks me for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point on, security is made aware and is told to watch out for this guy. Of course, he wasn't doing anything physical, so all they could do is watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would walkie me and I would dip into the back warehouse. I started seeing his friend consistently, who we called Ninja Friend, and all he ever did was walk around on his phone. I began to suspect that he was texting Stalker Kid to tell him I was at work, because sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would come in too. So I tested the theory and started walking randomly around the store. At one point, a friend who worked the register asked me why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her that this ninja friend would follow us everywhere, even just down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did this and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through those doors. Again, sure enough. So I'm making my way to the warehouse, and out steps Ninja Friend from an aisle and says, "She's right here." I just stare at him like, who the hell do you think you are? Stalker Kid walks up behind me and asks why I'm running away from him, and he lost my number and asks if I can give it to him again. I say, knowing damn good well I would never really give it to him, sure. I go to the warehouse and write, "This is where I work, don't ever come here again," and hand it to him. Glare at his friend, and then call security on the walkie. After that, I sit down in the warehouse and just break down. Security tells me later that he also cried when they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. This of course isn't the rules, but just friends caring about friends. So I say sure. Stalker Kid is out by my car waiting for me. So this is where security says screw it and calls the police, which we are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. A few years go by, nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car. I'm thinking that did the trick and I'm finally free. It's now 2012. My buddies and I are leaving work, ready to hit a night at the bar, per usual Thursday deal. We are walking out the door, where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound, to verify it's armed. As we are walking out, I hear it, that awful sound, "Hey." I cringe, grab my friend's arm and turn. There he is leaning on the car waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks him what he wants. Stalker says he just wants to talk to me. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car, just staring at me blankly. I start to think the worst. If my friend leaves me here, my gut tells me I'm not coming to work the next day, or ever. I'm terrified that he's had all these years to think about our last encounter, where I wrote that note that made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend goes off, pretends to be my boyfriend, and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller and much, much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot. And I'm a terrible person for this, but I'm sure you understand at this point. I was thinking, kick his ass. He spooks the soccer kid so bad, and I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting in his car and booking it out. Ever since, if he comes into my store, my friend stares him down, and soccer kid leaves. Never has he bought anything in all these years. Years later, I've moved on and gotten married, and moved out of town. But just recently, we moved back to start a business, and to this day, I still feel myself looking behind me while in stores just in case I randomly bump into him. He's caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects today. So this happened to me when I was about 7 and still lived in Portland with my grandparents. My grandma and I would always watch Lost together every night, and the news would come on afterwards. We saw that there was a sniper going around our area, and they were looking for him and trying to find out his location so they could arrest him, etc. I remember one day the whole school had to go on lockdown because someone reported seeing him near the school. So everyone had to go into the hall and wait out the whole situation until we were in the clear. I don't think I left school until around 7 p.m. that night. The police caught him and took him in for questioning. Later on that night on the news, we found out that he was hiding out in these small woods that we had right behind our house. The same woods that my granddad and I would go out for bike rides and walks most evenings. And the only reason we hadn't been going out recently was because of the shooter. I refused to leave the house for a good week or so because I was scared that he was still out there. And I wouldn't let my grandparents leave either because I would panic that something bad would happen to them, even though I knew he was in jail. To this day, I still have a mini panic attack whenever I visit my grandparents and am near those woods. I was about 6 years old when my encounter with this creep happened. My mom and I lived in a quiet, semi-ratchet neighborhood, and across the street from us lived this old Hispanic man. He was super old and bony, and he was probably around his 70s. I'm not too sure. It was a long time ago. He would often sit in his front yard for hours on end. Now, this obviously isn't very suspicious at first glance, yet nothing is ever that simple. My cousins used to live right down the street from us, and would always visit us over on the weekends. So as you would expect, we would play outside in the front yard, and of course, the old man would be there. He would usually just sit there and watch us, and as small children, none of us really paid any attention until he started coming over. He had a mango tree in his backyard, and he would always come over and offer my mother and I mangoes. My mom would always try to talk to him, since I was a shy kid and hating talking to people. Even now, I have a small fear of talking to older men, just something that I've never been able to shake off. This behavior isn't really shady until he started calling me over to talk to him. Every day after school he would be outside and he would call me over. My mom, being a little bit naive at the time, would tell me to go over there and say hi, but I would relentlessly refuse. In this instance, she forced me to go over. He would ask to speak to me as if I was some sort of pet. He would ask me if I would grow up to be a beautiful young woman and if I was willing to start growing into a woman now. He would also ask me inappropriate things. But being 6, I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. He also had a weird habit of trying to grab my hands. I was always confused on what he was asking me, and it didn't make the situation any better that he was trying to talk to me in Spanish, and I can only really understand when my mom speaks Spanish. He would always call my 4-year-old cousin over. He would ask her simple things, pretty much the same stuff, but nothing that any of us could really understand. Eventually the behavior got progressively worse. Every time I would come home from school, he would walk over to us and try to touch our head, and even try to hug us and pick us up at certain points. By instinct, we would run and hide by my mother. Now this is where it gets bad. My 2 older brothers lived with us, but them being high school students, my mom tasked them with babysitting me, to which they would never listen, so a majority of the time I was left home alone until my mom came home around 7. The old man noticed this. Every time my family left me alone, he would show up like clockwork and knock on our door, asking if anyone was home. He would just stand there and then leave. He did this pretty much every day until we moved out. I was a pretty vocal child to my mom, so if I didn't like someone, I would let her know about it. I told her that I didn't like this man and that he weirded me out and that I didn't want him coming by anymore. My mistake and misconfusion. She thought I meant that I didn't want him coming by bringing us mangoes, as I failed to mention that this guy was coming by knocking on our door every day when I was alone. So this cycle continued for about 2 more years, I would say. As I got older, I stopped inviting my cousins over, and instead I went to their house. Every time I got home from school, I would bolt for her door and run inside her home. I never made eye contact with him and would always hide in my room whenever he came over. Then we finally moved out. We had actually moved out during the evening and pretty sporadically due to family illness, and I was super happy about it. We moved to an apartment complex closer to my school and away from that neighborhood that I lived in my entire life. I thought that this would be the end of it, but a while after, we went back to visit him. Apparently my mom felt bad for leaving without saying goodbye to the nice old man, as my mom called him. We went back weeks after, and we were in his front lawn as he sat there talking to us. I just sat to the side and failed to look at him, and it was pretty awkward the entire time. Several times my mom tried to get me to talk to him, and he tried to make some very questionable physical contact that I clearly denied. It was at this moment that I guess my mom picked up on his behavior. She grabbed me and pulled me close to her, and politely told the man we had to leave. We never went back again, and that was the end of it for 8 years. Flash forward 8 years, we moved back into the neighborhood, but in a different area. Obviously at the age of 16, I wanted to keep a healthier weight and took pride in my appearance, as do a lot of teens. I would run the neighborhood picking the same route, until one day, the route that I usually took was blocked by cars from a party that was happening. I didn't feel like dealing with it, so I took a different route and came across the street I used to live in. I jogged casually, looking around, seeing how little things had changed, until I saw my house. And then I looked ahead, and what do you know, there was the same old man, sitting in the same spot. Keep in mind, there were a bunch of girls in tank tops and shorts sitting on the cars across from him. I had my music in, and I ignored the guy, and just planned to be a normal jogger. As I passed by, the man reached out for me, and I stopped and pulled my headphones out and politely said, "Yes?" He looked at me for a second, and my gut was screeching at me to leave at that moment. He stared at me for a minute before he broke out into a grin. He told me that he recognized me as a little girl years before and complimented me on my appearance. He went into detail about how he loved to watch me play in my front yard. He said it very pleasantly, which made me think that maybe I overreacted as a small child. He spoke to me more on how I had grown up and how that he missed how small and beautiful I was. I soon realized that I should listen to my gut instinct. After complimenting me, he asked me if I had a boyfriend, to which I responded no, to which he said that was good. He then asked me if I was still a virgin, and after all these years I came to realize that he was practically asking me all these same questions he asked me when I was a small child, but at the time I didn't understand. The last straw was when he asked me if I wanted to come in so he could treat me. I declined and left, and I never took that route again. Days later I told my mom everything about the guy, and when I asked her what was wrong with him, she told me that my aunt had told her that his wife had died years before we moved into the house, and he just kinda lost it, and everyone suspected that he was just some drug addict creeper. But no one knew all the info until we had moved out of that place a few years later. Either way, I hope I never see that old mangled man again. This happened around 8 years ago. I was probably 7 or 8. I just moved to Ecorse, Michigan with my grandmother. It was me, my 2 sisters, and my grandmother living there. Both sisters are older and braver than I am. I remember us 3 sleeping on a futon in the living room, and my grandmother had just bought a nightlight for the next room so I wouldn't be scared. But every night it just didn't seem to work. I remember not being able to sleep one night and just staring at the ceiling. Then from the corner of my eye, I see my nightlight go on, but it wasn't like it just turned on. It was like someone moved from standing in front of it. I tapped my older sister to wake her up, and she witnessed it all as well. We waited until the morning to tell my grandmother, but of course she didn't believe us. Fast forward 2 months, my favorite cousin came to visit me and one of my sisters. We were playing in the backyard with sticks and branches. My cousin was obsessed with Resident Evil at the time, so he was hitting plants with the stick, calling the game, "Chop off the heads." At one point we were in the back left of the yard, and my cousin finds this box. It's a pretty long box. I was somewhat of a tall kid, and if I were to crouch a little, I could fit in it. My cousin joked that it was a coffin, and since I was a kid, I believed him. But we all forgot about it later. Fast forward 2 months, we're moving out. Grandma said that she found a better place, but somehow I knew that this place just gave her the creeps. Once me and my sister moved most of our things to the new house, we just stayed there to settle in. My grandma went back to the old house to say a prayer. I don't know why, but she's always been one to do that. She returned to the new house and pulled my older sister aside and told her something, with an unsettling look on her face. I wasn't told till recently what they were talking about. My grandma said that when she was saying a prayer, she happened to open her eyes and saw a little girl. My grandma's eyes were filled with tears as she said it. She continued with telling me that she called the house owner a few days later, and he told her that he was desperate to get someone into the house because he was losing money, so he just didn't tell her the background of it. Turns out, the last 2 people that lived there were a father and his daughter. For some unknown reason, the father murdered the daughter in the room, then hid her in the far back of the closet. I never told her about that coffin-like box that me and my cousins found, but I still wonder if it was her in that box. This happened when I was 11 years old, which I am now 13, and I still remember it clear as day. I lived in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't have much friends. There was a huge forest though, so I would go out there and play. One day I went out to play, and it was almost around 6:30, so it was getting kinda dark, and let me mention I lived in Wisconsin at the time. I went deep into the forest and everything was good until 7 rolled around. Now I was used to hearing weird noises in the woods, but nothing like this. I heard an awful scream, not human-like either. It was like a demon, and it scared me. I was a curious little girl though, and I went to investigate. I got about half a mile in when I saw a non-human-like creature perched in a tree. Now instead of running for my life, I froze in shock and fear, and before I knew it, that awful smelly thing, was right behind me. I wanted to scream for help, but I didn't. I don't know what this creature could do to me, so I just stood there like a rock, hoping it would leave. It screamed again, but even worse than the first time, and I felt like I was gonna go deaf. Eventually, after minutes of that thing staring at me, it flew, and I mean flew up to its tree. I stood there looking at it for what felt like hours. I whipped out my phone. I was gonna flash the beam in its eye and try to make a run for it. Now, did I mention that I'm a little chubby for my age? So I couldn't run fast, and that sucked because this creature jumped and ran after me through those woods. I felt my world spinning around me, and as I screamed for help, that creature caught up to me, and I felt like my life was over. I made a mad dash for the bushes, hoping that I was able to hide, which I did. I was waiting in that bush for a half an hour, thinking he was gone, so I made a dash to my back door, hoping it wasn't behind me. Instead, he was perched on our air conditioner. I told my parents that very night, and they called me crazy, but I know what I saw. I'm never going in those woods again. Monsters are real. I don't know what this creature was, but who knows what it would have done if it would have got its hands on me. Somewhat recently, within the past year, I joined an app called Yobo. I had trouble finding guys, and I figured that it would be the best way to meet someone, especially since I wasn't old enough yet to join apps like Tinder. My first night on the app, this guy messaged me. He looked a bit old for his age, which he stated was 17. Since he was cute and my age, I thought it was a score. I also assumed, like an idiot, that was his age and his pictures were just flattering enough to make him look older and more mature. We hit it off instantly. We had lots of flirting and sending pictures back and forth. Thankfully, I never sent him anything too explicit. He would always compliment me on how beautiful I was, and he just wanted to see me and how much he would cuddle with me if we were to meet up. I strongly considered this, as I could drive myself and just use going out with a friend as a cover. Luckily, I was busy the weekend after we first met, and things also ended before this could happen. I started to get suspicious that he was maybe not who he said he was, as anyone should be on the internet, especially me as a younger woman. I tried multiple times to ask him if we could FaceTime, so I could verify this. He instantly flipped demeanors, getting kind of aggressive and defensive, asking why I wanted to and why it mattered. Red flags immediately were raised. We talked for another week before he started getting more aggressive. There was a few times I would act bratty to flirt, and he didn't take it well. He called me a whore and told me he would never want to be with a girl who was with other guys. I was also working quite a lot, so sometimes I would miss his messages or see them and forget to message him back. He would start cursing me out, calling me names, and calling me out for leaving them read. That immediately was the last straw for me, and I called him out on his bullshit. I went off on him, explaining that I was very busy and that my school and work would always come before he did. He screenshotted my text, where we talked on Snapchat, so I could see every time he screenshotted it, and his idea of a great response was, "So no head?" I blocked him and found him on every platform and blocked him there so he couldn't contact me. Later found out, when blocking him, he was actually 24. So I'm female, and at the time of this story I was 16. Since I didn't have a job, I babysat kids. I was babysitting 7 kids from different families. I was also watching my 3 brothers, making 10 kids total. It was snack time for the kids, so I went to get something for them to eat. I finished preparing the last meal when a shady looking man approached the house. I told the kids to go in another room and hide. I had a small pocket knife and my phone ready to protect the kids at all costs. I witnessed the guy trying to open the doors and windows. I called the neighbor, but no answer. I went to the oldest kid, who was 13, and told her if anything happened that she should sneak out the back door. The kid was pretty understanding and not questioning for a teen. I saw the front door lock jiggling. I told her to gather the other kids and run to the neighbor's house for help. The front door opened as the last 2 kids exited. The man asked in a scruffy voice where the kids were. I tried to play dumb, but he wasn't buying it. He told me that he would shoot me if I didn't tell him where the kids had gone. He got super close to me. I slowly pulled the knife out of my pocket and stabbed him through his arm. I wasn't going to let him get the kids. Unfortunately for me, I thought he was bluffing about the gun. He took out his gun as I ran away and fired 2 shots. Both luckily missed me. After he missed, he put down his gun and tried to pull the knife out of his arm. So I grabbed the ropes off the desk and tackled him to the ground. I tied him to the support beam and ran out the back door. I found the kids with at least 10 neighbors because they had all split up. The cops came and they told me that this guy was wanted for some violent crimes. My mother, grandmother, and I lived in the same house, but in 2 different flats, in a very short street with only 6 houses in total. We moved here in 2012, and everything was fine. One day, there was an old man moving into another house in the street. He seemed very nice, but my image of him changed quickly when these incidents began. My grandma lives on the 1st floor, so everyone walking past the house can technically look into her flat when she has her blinds open. She started telling us about how she'd sometimes see 2 feet under her blinds of the big window, always the same shoes. One day she pulls the blinds open when the shoes are there, and guess who it is? Yeah, the old man. Turns out he had been watching her for quite some time through her windows and even from his balcony, which had the perfect view of the big window in her living room. As if that wasn't bad enough, he started talking to me when I got home from school because I needed to pass his house. We didn't know each other. We had nothing to do with each other, not even remotely. He began asking me how I was, if school was finally over, and so on. I didn't like it, but politely answered. One day, he started asking me about my grandmother and mother, how they were doing, etc. I was very creeped out by this, given the history of the incidents. I started ignoring him, and after a few days of ignoring him, he got the hint. But there's more. My grandmother has sort of a caregiver who comes to her flat twice a week to clean and deliver groceries because she can't walk or bend over that well anymore. This caregiver is also the one that comes to our stalking neighbor's house to help him. After my grandmother had brought it up to us that he was watching her the other day, the caregiver told us that the old man would want hugs from her, look at her ass, cleavage, etc., and also sometimes touch her in places like her waist and her thighs. Supposedly unintentionally. As if this wasn't already more than terrifying, he also rides the bus sometimes. Sometimes I'm in that same bus, or sometimes he even rides a school bus for some reason. Anyways, one day I was waiting for the bus, and there was this girl with a headscarf waiting for the bus too. The man walks up to her and starts talking to her. I had my headphones in, so out of curiosity, I pulled one of them out and listened to what he was talking about. I was shocked when I heard him talking about immigrants being a problem for the US and that they should get out of the country and such, but in a way that he didn't say it directly, but rather hinted at those things. The girl was really confused, and then the bus came, which she seemed relieved by, understandably. This was just a section of the creepiest and worst incidents. There are many more that are not as creepy. A little background story. I'm Tessa and 14. I live in Minnesota and I go to this one campground up north in the middle of nowhere. I've gone to this campground for 11 years and still go there to this day. It was only open for a year or two before we started going there. My mom was really popular there. We knew everyone. They are always having parties and staying up late till 1 o'clock drunk as fuck. This particular night haunts me forever. Me and my friend Chloe were best friends. She was a brunette and I was a wild blonde. She always had this thing where she never really liked sleepovers. This one night we planned on having a sleepover outside our actual camper. Our parents didn't stay out late that one night for some reason. We had a fire and did the regular camping things. It was about 1 when we decided to go to the shower house with showers and bathrooms. So we were in the shower house planning to hang out because the shower house had a lodge and was the only place that had Wi-Fi. Our data did not work anywhere else because we were in the middle of nowhere, so we planned on staying there till 3 a.m. It was about 2 a.m. and we needed our chargers. We go to the camper to grab our chargers, and on the way back, we're just standing outside, getting some fresh air before going inside. Chloe is on her phone, and around the corner behind her is an old guy, or maybe a woman. They looked to be around 100 years old, and this person was walking a rat, or it looked like one at least. I scream and tell her what I see, and the guy has a crazy smile on his face. We ran as fast as our long legs would let us, till we got inside. I started to cry because I was so scared, and she was freaking out because she did not see what was behind her. We plugged in our chargers and hesitate to call our parents because we didn't want them to get mad at us, and we also wanted to stay out until 3 a.m. We were not supposed to be up past 1 on that night, so we were really freaking out. We were in there for about an hour after we saw this creepy person, and we hesitated opening the door in fear of what we would see. We ended up opening the door thinking that we were trapped and we were gonna die, and we ran outside. As we got outside, I saw the old man with something that looked like a knife in his hand around the corner, and he was just staring at us like he was gonna do something. To this day, we always remember that night. P.S. Our parents believed us and were mad at us for not calling them. This happened last summer. Me, my husband, and our 5 kids lived 5 minutes away from this local park. My kids, who were 2 and 4 at the time, both girls, were super bored, so I suggested walking to the park. We put them in their little red wagon and grabbed some water bottles, a few toys, and headed out. The walk was fine, nothing happened. We got to the park and the kids started to play. That's when I noticed a white car had parked across the street. I noticed an older man just sitting there in the car watching us, like deliberately staring at us, never turned his head to look away or anything. It was like he wasn't even trying to hide it. I told my husband, and he told me to grab my phone and get a picture of him. I started recording him, holding my phone up so he could see that I could tell that he was watching. This asshole smiles creepily at me while eyeing the crap out of my girls. I grabbed both of my kids and stuck them behind me and told them to stay behind me and not to move. My husband started walking towards the car and screamed, "You better stop staring at my kids, asshole." The guy kept weirdly smiling. As my husband got closer to the car, he pulled out and drove away. But I was able to jot down his license plate number. I called the cops and told them what happened. The next day they called us back and asked us if we could come in and show them the video. We did, and they found him later and arrested him. Come to find out, he was a sex offender and wasn't supposed to be anywhere near parks or schools because of previous convictions. When they arrested him, he was at another park not too far from ours. This guy wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he was a creeper. This is a story about when I used to live in Thailand. I'm pretty young, and this scared me a lot. It all started when my parents took us on vacation to the beach. They got a pretty cheap hotel, 3 minutes walking from the beach. The first night it was nice, except when I heard a kid shout and woke me up. I thought it was from the hotel, but it was 2 a.m. and they should be sleeping. It was sharp screams, really sharp. I got a bit scared, but didn't have the balls to wake up my parents, which were sleeping in the next room. I ended up just falling back asleep. When I woke up, I couldn't find my phone, and the lamp I had left on turned off by itself. I asked my sister if she did it, and she said she didn't. I was really skeptical about that. I ended up having some fun, so I forgot about it. But that night, I heard a kid crying, saying, "Don't do it, please." I got the hell up and woke up my sister, but she slapped me and said, "Go back to sleep, dumbass." So that's what I did. But on that same night, I woke up to what I think was a shadow of a kid saying, "Help me, he's coming." At that point, some people might have said I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. It was pure reality. Dumb me didn't say anything. The next day, we meet a Belgian man who lived in the hotel. In a sarcastic way, he said, "Did you sleep well?" My mom didn't get it, but I did. The last night, before we went back, I was asleep and woke up to see a freaking gardener. He was old. When I got back, the weird guy I am, I spent 9 hours on the PC digging into this, and what I found was terrifying. Where I was sleeping was the house of Thailand's most notorious murderer. I jumped from my computer. What I found was a Chinese man that immigrated to Thailand for work as a farmer. But what they didn't know was that he would kidnap children and eat their livers. Now it all made sense. So a couple days ago, my boyfriend and I were driving up this road that was in the middle of the woods. As we turned the corner, we first see a deer. The deer didn't even flinch at our car coming up the road, which was weird. Then we saw it. Now, I'm not normally a person that scares easily, but seeing this thing made me piss myself. It looked as if it was talking to the deer. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, very thin, and it was all black with wings. It flew up right in front of the car, and my boyfriend slammed on the brakes, turns to me and says, "Tell me you saw that," and asked me to describe it to him to make sure he wasn't going crazy. I did, and we sped all the way home. This happened in about a minute, although it felt a lot longer. I was telling my dad about it, and he said he saw the same exact creature years earlier at my sister's bus stop. He tried to convince my sister it was this a garbage bag or something, and my sister's response was, "Daddy, that thing was too fast and too big to be a trash bag." And all my dad could say was, "I don't know." If anyone has any idea what this could be, I would like to know. I'm very skeptical about all of this, and I'm looking for a more logical explanation. Now this isn't a scary story, but more of a creepy one. My friend's dad's family used to live in the woods near Eureka Springs, Arkansas. My friend's uncle was the oldest of the 3 kids and was allowed to explore the woods on his own, even though he was only about 9 at the time. One day he came across a little cottage nestled in the woods. He knocked on the door and was greeted by 2 old ladies. He promptly asked for some water, as he had been exploring for a few hours. The ladies invited him in and gave him some milk and cookies and sat him down and talked to him for a while he was petting their white cat. They talked for a while and eventually invited him to stay for dinner and spend the night because it was getting dark and he was ways away from home. His parents were pretty used to him being in the woods for nights without coming back, so they accepted it without question. He spent the night without incident and returned home the next morning. He would visit them many more times over the next year, and one day they told him to bring his parents and his brothers next time he came. So the next week, the whole family embarked on a long trek to the cottage. When they arrived, however, they found the remains of a small cottage that appeared to be abandoned for years. Everyone was confused, as they all trusted that my friend's uncle had visited these women many times. They had absolutely no idea what happened, or if my uncle had actually been visiting anybody. To make things weirder, as they were leaving, an old skinny white cat ran past them, darting into the trees, leaving them in utter shock. In 2006 or 7, when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I experienced something quite strange. I had never seen anything that could be considered creepy at my house, but one night I certainly did. It was around midnight when I happened to wake up. This was pretty common in a lot of people, so I thought nothing of it, and was just getting ready to go back to sleep. As usual, my bedroom door was open with a hallway light turned on, and that's when I saw it. An abnormally tall, dark, faceless black figure in the corner of my room. It was looking down at me, staying quiet and still the entire time. I didn't really know what to think. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared. I was just merely wondering, what is this thing? The tall figure continued to stand there, still staring at me. I knew I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis because I was able to move. Yet, this seemed far too real to be a dream. I decided to slowly turn around and face the wall instead. I covered myself with blankets and closed my eyes. I don't know what the tall figure did after that, if it had even left or not. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I decided against telling my parents about what I had seen. They were pretty hardcore Christians, and I honestly didn't want to freak them out. Yet, I did eventually decide to tell at least my mother about it. She luckily didn't freak out. Instead, she told me that she too has seen something very similar, if not the same figure. Except her encounter was quite different and much more disturbing from mine. According to my mother's account, the tall figure also approached her in the middle of the night. My father remained asleep next to her. Suddenly, the tall figure lunged itself at my mother and began to choke her. She was able to repent it in the name of Jesus a couple of times. When the dark figure finally backed away and disappeared, it was only then that my father woke up, but he still had no idea what just happened. My mother told me the reason why I had not been attacked was supposedly demons, as she thought this figure was. Do not attack children. Personally, I see it as a bad omen. Some terrible things have happened to me over the years after the appearance of the dark figure, but I have since recovered and have a lot of support. I'm 21 years old now and still live in that same house, yet I have never experienced anything like this ever since. I can only wonder what the tall figure was thinking as it stared at me on that night. Okay, so this happened to me a few months ago. A new family recently moved into the neighborhood, and at first, they seemed nice. It was a woman and a man, and their 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl. Since they were new, my family presented themselves to them and brought them a welcoming gift. Since they were unpacking, my family asked if they needed help, and they accepted, which meant I had to help. There was this one box that caught my eye, and as I went to get it, the man stopped me and said that he can get it. That's when I started to wonder, like crazy, what was in that box. That night for dinner, my family invited the new neighbors, but they declined, so it was just my family. I asked my mom if she knew what the box had in it, cause it looked weird. She told me not to judge, and it was probably just private things, so I shouldn't get into other people's business. Later that night when I was sleeping, I heard our back door open, and footsteps coming in. I locked my door. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't know who it was, so I just forgot about it. The next day I woke up and checked the back door, and it was unlocked. I was creeped out and told my mom that I thought the family came in and did something to the house. She then called me crazy, and I have to be respectful, and what if it was the other way around? After she told me this, I have to hang out with the little boy because he left all his old friends in his old town and needed someone to play with. So later that day I hung out with him at the park, near my neighborhood. I asked him his name, and he told me it was Diego. Which was crazy because my name was Diego. At first I was like, oh my god, we have the same name. Then he said, like Diego from Grachi. And there's a TV show I watched called Grachi, and it had a character named Diego. I was a little creeped out at first, but shrugged it off as a coincidence. Later that night at dinner, I felt like my family was being watched. After dinner, I spent the night at my friend Jake's house. The next day, I ran into the boy and his mom. He said, "How was the sleepover?" I replied, "How did you know about the sleepover?" He said, "Your mom told me." I went straight back to my house and asked my mom. She said she never said anything. But then my mom said something that scared the crap out of me. She said the neighbor's mom, let's call her Asia, asked her if she could have the number to her doctor. My mom never mentioned this to Asia. She then started getting suspicious. We secretly called Uncle Larry, who was a police officer, to investigate the house. He found something really chilling. It was a camera in our kitchen. It was hidden, and that's when I remembered someone came in through the back door that leads to the kitchen. A day goes by and they check the footage, and now a probable cause. My uncle goes to their house and knocks on the door. The mother opens the door, and he says he needs to investigate and ask some questions. She complied, but said she had to do something first, but he said no, and she had to wait outside with her husband and kids. The police went into the house to search it. There they found a box full of cameras that looked exactly like the ones he found. That family had been spying on us the whole time, and who knows who else they were spying on. We pressed charges and the family moved somewhere else. My dad was born in Alabama in 1962. He moved to San Bernardino, California in 1968. He's told me this story many of times. It always gave me the chills. My dad was probably in his early 20s when he went out hiking through the Harupa trails with his friends in the neighboring city of Fontana. He was on top of a little hill when below him on a dirt trail road a Jeep was driving by, but this isn't what's creepy about it. As they took a closer look, a body was being dragged behind it by both feet. They got a little freaked out and left for a while. They went back down to regular Fontana and got something to eat, thinking that they didn't really see what they thought they saw. But when they went back to the same hill a couple hours later, coroners and CSI and tons of cops were surveilling the area. My dad left immediately. Knowing that someone was actually being murdered and dragged is what's really scary about the situation. I'm a single Christian woman in my 20s, and since I don't have many friends in my local church, I decided to sign up for a website where I could make some friends online. Some of the site members also used it for the purpose of dating, which was okay with me as I was open to all possibilities. Soon, I met this guy that seemed very nice, and we had a lot of the same interests in common. After a few months of friendship, we began to Skype, since we lived far away from each other, so we couldn't meet up in person. We began chatting, and he seemed okay, but every now and then he would pause, go quiet, and just stare into the webcam. When I told him it was creepy and asked him what he was doing, he replied that he enjoys staring in silence. I wasn't sure if that was normal, and since around the same time I was busy dating someone else, I avoided this guy for several months. However, when I broke up with my ex, I was feeling lonely and decided I wouldn't mind chatting to a friend to take my mind off of things. This guy happened to be the only person available. We ended up chatting every couple days for the next 2 weeks, and I even started to get used to his uncomfortable staring when things turned weirder. During our conversations, I found out that this guy was in his 30s, still a virgin, and we both agreed and believed that sex should only happen after marriage. So it came as a surprise one day when he confessed that he had a fetish for girls in school uniforms and asked me if he could send me an erotic schoolgirl outfit with a very short mini skirt because he wanted to see me wearing it. I said no, since I didn't like wearing revealing clothes. Another time, he showed up in his bed on the webcam, only wearing underwear, and began to ask me dirty questions. I just laughed and made a few jokes, and tried to change the subject. However, he was not very responsive to that conversation, instead preferring to stare at a screen into the webcam, grinning, while making repetitive motions with his hand under his bed covers. I didn't want to see this, so I made an excuse and left. I should have completely stopped chatting with him after that, but the next day and the days after, he repeatedly texted me wanting to go on webcam. Since I was bored and lonely, I asked him to promise that he wouldn't be naked or do dirty things, and he agreed. For a couple of days we managed to carry on chatting, but soon after he did it again, and this time much worse. First, he asked me to touch myself and send him a recording of it. I refused, explaining to him in case my computer ever gets hacked, I don't want such things being seen anywhere on the internet. "Oh, but you don't have to make a video. I just want to listen to the noises you make," he replied. Again, I refused, saying that made me uncomfortable. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. He took off his underwear and began touching himself as if he was stroking a pet while grinning at me with a big creepy smile. I told him I had to go and terminated the video call. That same evening, I sent him a long message explaining why I didn't think we would be compatible with each other and saying that I found him disrespectful and wanted to stop seeing him. He responded saying that I am stuck in the past, only thinking about my ex who used me. Even though this guy had no idea what went on between me and my ex. At that, I got angry and told him not to speak to me again. Backstory that's relevant. I'm the oldest of 3. Before my mom and dad got divorced, my dad was very mentally and emotionally abusive, and a few times almost became physically abusive. So I grew up very cautious and protective of my younger siblings. On to the story. At the time, I was about 8 and my sister was 6. So my mom was asleep, exhausted because my father would never let her sleep when he was home, and my father was now at work. My sister wanted something to eat, and my father yelled so loud the night before, it kept both of us up. But us being kids, we weren't tired from the lack of sleep. So I decided to treat her by picking up something that she wanted from the store, and at that point in time, I managed to save up about $2 in change. We have went to the store before by ourselves, and nothing happened, so I figured it would be fine. We went to the store to get 2 donuts. We bought the donuts, and we still had 80 cents left. So me being smart, instead of going to the Circle K right next to the store, we went to the other one, only 10 minutes away, because the one right next to the store that we were at had a lot of druggies hanging around it. We both wanted an icy, and we're okay sharing since we didn't have enough money for 2. At the time a large one was 69 cents, so we got it and left. We wanted to wait until we got home to eat our donuts, so we had 2 things to carry. My sister carried the donuts. I carried the drink. This is important. We started walking back home. As we were going to cross the street, this guy that was sitting on the corner called out for me and my sister. He looked creepy. I had an uneasy feeling, so I slowed my pace, holding my sister's hand so she slowed down too. The guy called out for us and said, "Hey, come here. I got some toys that you can play with." I told my sister that my hand was getting sweaty and just switched to my other one. This put me between her and the creep. By doing this, I just switched my hand that was holding the cup, and the creep noticed that my sister wasn't holding one at the time. So he says to my sister, "Hey little girl, come here. Do you want a soda of your own? I can get you your own." My sister never had one of her own because I could never afford it. So this intrigued her, and she started walking to the other side of me, still holding onto my hand. At this moment, I noticed a car coming. I said, "Car, go," in a commanding voice to my sister, which meant there was a car coming and we had to run across the street if we didn't want to be hit. So we ran. As soon as we started running, the creep started getting up. I told my sister, "Race you," so she wouldn't stop running. Then when the car blocked the creep's view, I pulled her into the alley, and she gave me a questioning look as I put my fingers over my lips and pulled her behind the tree in the alley. The guy walked across the street, then past us. I was peeking between the leaves to keep watch. He was looking mad. After a few minutes of making sure he didn't come back, my sister and I went through the alley that led directly towards our apartments. This was 3 years ago, and I started college down the country. I was 18 and on Tinder. I never actually met anyone off of it, but I would just swipe through guys just to be nosy and see who else was on it. I was swiping right on some, and after about an hour, got a message from this guy. We made some small talk. It was kind of awkward, so I stopped replying. A day later, I got a friend's request from him on Facebook. Mind you, I have a common enough name, so it would have taken ages for him to find me, and we have no mutual friends, and my Tinder photo is not on my Facebook page. The only thing I had on it was the university I was attending, so maybe that's how he found me, but I don't know. I then quickly got a follow request on Instagram, and somehow he found out my Snapchat username. I don't have it on any of my social medias, and it is a variation of my full name and some extra vowels and an underscore. I was freaking out at this point. I messaged him asking how he found out my full name, and he just replied with, "I think we have a connection. I really want to get to know you better." I unmatched him, deleted my Tinder, and blocked him on all the accounts that he tried to add me on. After that, it was quiet for a few months. I was mainly staying in and was knuckling down as I had a lot of assignments to get to. This was towards the end of November. I had no assignments due for 2 weeks, so I decided to go out with some friends. One of my friends stayed in the student accommodations, and the other was commuting, so she was studying with my other friend. I decided to walk back to my house, as my landlady would probably freak out if I wasn't home that morning, and I really wish I got a taxi instead. My walk back was about 15 minutes from the local nightclub where we were at. It was about 3 a.m. at this point. I was at the front door of my house, opening up. The door was annoying, as it had 2 different locks, and I had to pull the handle towards myself to help open it up. It's also tough when you're tipsy and you're trying not to wake up the family you're staying with. Anyway, as I finally unlock the door, a dark car pulls up into the housing estate I'm staying at. It's a pretty big place and has a big green area for children and people to play with their dogs. The car comes towards me, so I quickly get inside and lock the door. The car pulls into the driveway of the house that I'm staying at and just sits there with its headlights on. I'm there shaking, too afraid to move from crouched below the door as the frosted glass was halfway up. Eventually I get courage and I go upstairs to look at the bedroom window to try to see who it was. Just then the car pulls out of the driveway and speeds away. A few days later I get a new friends request from the creepy Tinder guy on a new Facebook profile, as there's no photos on this account, just the same name. I blocked it. It was bad enough that it caused me to transfer universities the following year. Thankfully I haven't heard anything since. I don't know if it was bad timing or if it was the Tinder creep that sat in the driveway, but it was petrifying. If you take anything from this, be careful who you let in on these social media or dating apps and what information you have up. When I was about 14 or 15, my dad and I went camping with one of his friends at a local park 5 minutes away from where we lived. The campground is located in the biggest state park in our area, with miles of trails, many of which are for horseback riding and or mountain biking, in addition to being able to walk the trails. The day after we initially set up camp, we decided to hike some of the trails after breakfast. After walking for about 20 minutes, we come up to this group of trees with people both standing on the ground and hanging out in the trees. The odd part is, they were all wearing medieval clothing and they all had some sort of weapon. They asked us if we were part of the clan, and if we weren't, we couldn't pass. We tried to explain that we were just campers walking along this particular trail, but I don't think they got it because they asked us the same question again. One of the people started coming towards us. That's when we started running in the other direction. At the time we weren't sure what these people were and what they were doing out in the middle of the woods, and now that I think of it, it was probably a group of people LARPing, but at the time we didn't know what LARPing was. I laugh at it now. When I was 15, I was in a really bad mental headspace. With that being said, I was depressed, lonely, and desperate for someone's attention. So against my better judgment, I made an account on Plenty of Fish. I understand that I put myself in a dangerous position for predators, but I also understand that any man who I told my age to should have reported my account and not spoken to me. But after swiping left and right for an hour, I met a man we will call Red. Red was 26. A father of 2 beautiful toddlers, and a Puerto Rican native who recently moved to Florida. He spoke a fair bit of English, and had this charm to him when he spoke. When I told him my age, it's scary now to think about how okay he was with it. He simply told me that he wouldn't have any sexual relations, and that our interactions would be innocent. We talked for a few months, even talked about meeting up. When I talked to Red, I felt happy, whole, like I finally found someone. The first few times we met up, it was fine. We went to outlets, Disney Springs, and the movies. He was a perfect gentleman, held my hand, opened doors for me, and kept his hands off me. We kissed a bit, but nothing too intense. After 6 months into our relationship, I turned 16, and I invited him to my house, through the means of sneaking in, through my window of course, and he agreed. We were just hanging out, watching a movie when he kissed me in a way he had never done before, in a way that I've never been kissed before. It was surprising, and without having to be said, overwhelming. I got scared. It finally hit me that he was a full-grown man, and I was a child. I got off my bed and told him he had to leave. His face contorted into anger, and he stepped towards me, trying to convince me through his gritted teeth not to make him leave. He reached out to grab my shoulder, and out of instinct, I shoved him in the chest to make him back off. He in return shoved me harsh back. A sharp hot pain suddenly overwhelmed me, spreading from the back of my head down to the rest of my body. Then everything went black. Next thing I knew, I was hearing blood-curdling screams. I was dazed and too weak to open my eyes fully. I was just barely able to make out that it was my mom. I felt wetness on my head and my body felt so cold. It was just as I gathered that something was wrong that I lost consciousness again. The following time I awoke was in a hospital bed. My head was pounding and my back was aching. I reached up hazily to feel where the pain was coming from, and my fingertips grazed over a row of staples on a bald patch on the back of my head, making me wince. A doctor and my mom explained to me that I must have slipped and hit my head on the windowsill, being that that's where the first impact was, before falling onto the tile floor. My mom came into my room to wake me up for school and found me laying in a pool of my own blood. She thought I was dead because my breathing was so faint, but had no idea why or how I slipped. I was too embarrassed and ashamed of myself to tell anyone. I didn't think I deserved justice for what Red did to me. Later on, I found out the obstacles for my injury, which were hearing loss in my right ear, as well as the inability to retain some old memories. The event and a few flash memories of my childhood are the last thing I remembered before the incident. Though I was saddened by this, I was happy to be alive and never see Red again. Now being 18, a few months ago I signed up for Plenty of Fish. I'll keep my guard up this time, though I don't plan on going on any dates. I look out for warning signs, and upon the first one, will just block almost anyone. Then one day I received a message from Red. I had blocked him on every platform, including his number. It said, "Hey, how have you been?" I didn't respond, but I looked at his profile. It still said he was 26, which was odd, so perhaps I didn't know his real age. Perhaps I didn't know this man at all, being that he thought he must have killed me and selfishly ran off without attempting to see if I was alive. It all starts with my parents very sick in the hospital for completely unrelated reasons to the story. During that time, my mom's uncle, I will call him Bill for now, lived in a house in a smaller neighborhood, but a good one. He was basically a kid in an adult's body. He was happy and joyful as anyone could ever be. While my parents were sick, Bill was in his house after struggling with cancer and an incident of carbon monoxide poisoning. He knew he was going to pass soon, but was waiting for my mom to get back from the hospital to know that she would be okay. She got there and found him in bed waiting for her, very weak. She told him that she was okay, and that's all he needed to hear before passing on. After that, many years passed. My parents got the house from him, and after a while, they had me and my brother. While we still lived there, many oddities occurred very frequently, like things falling and not being able to find out what caused it. But the odd part is, it almost seemed playful and never harmful to anyone. Some of the time, we would be in the room alone, commonly in the basement, and you could almost feel like there was someone there. But it wasn't scary, it almost seemed like it was giving a feeling of home. The reason I'm conflicted on this scenario is because when we moved to our new house, none of this occurred. Was it a ghost? I'm not even sure. So this isn't my story, but it's my best friend's. She told me about her uncle, that is, her stepdad's brother, and how sketchy he was. There's always a questionable uncle in every family, isn't there? My friend said a few years ago, whenever she would meet up with her step-uncle, he would always give her the creeps. He would say things like, "The wife and I are going to the trailer for a week, and you should come along. Oh, my wife is only going to be there for a couple of days, but you're welcome to stay as long as you like." Not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but the way he said it made her feel real uncomfortable. He would bring her presents all the time, and find any excuse to be alone with her. He would often come to her tattoo shop when no one else was around, despite living an hour away. There was only one door to the shop, so she would either have to stick around until closing time, or until he decided to leave. And when he hugged her, his hands would go too low, and his hugs would last way too long. I can't remember if I ever met this guy, but I was very familiar with my friend's stepdad, and I never cared for him, so it's safe to say it isn't a stretch to imagine this. What makes me angry is that my friend finally confessed to her stepdad and told him what had been going on and how it upset her, but the bastard didn't even believe her. Nothing was done because good old uncle was just trying to be nice and my friend was just overreacting. About 3 years ago, my friend's life became much more difficult. Her mother suddenly passed away, which was very sad for everyone. With all the stress and grief involved, my friend was at her wit's end. Her mother's memorial service was held at their home, and the entire family came by to give their condolences. My friend was lost in all of it, not sure what to think. Of course, Uncle was there. Sometime during the service, he came up to her, gave her one of his too long, too low hugs, and whispered in her ear, "I dream of you." My friend said that she sat on the porch and couldn't function for hours. Okay, so let's get this straight. I'm a 15-year-old girl who lives in New Zealand. Back when this took place, I was around 12 years old. In 2016, a couple days before Christmas, the worst thing happened to us. We found out that my auntie died, which is on my dad's side of the family, and they were very close. She was a jockey and fell off her horse, and it crushed her. Her favorite thing was to smell lilies. This will be useful later. Anyway, after about 2 years after her death, we visited her grave again for Christmas, and have been here to see her many times, but this time felt different in a way. The air was heavy, and I got a wave of dread. It was so overwhelming that I had to stay in the car for a bit. Once I thought the bad feeling had calmed down, I decided to hop out and look around the cemetery. As I was doing so, I smelled a familiar smell, like the smell of lilies, and at first it was comforting in a way, but then I felt like I was being watched. But like whatever was watching me didn't want me to be there. So I listened to my gut feeling and booked it back to the rest of my family. Not shortly after, once all of us were in the car driving back, we saw that there was something in the middle of the road. So we stopped, but the longer we stared at it, the more we realized it was my auntie, and she looked worried. And about 2 seconds later, a car comes flying by in full speed, and then she disappears. I'll tell you now that it scares me, and I couldn't sleep that night. But the longer I thought about it, I realized that she saved us that day, and she was looking out for us. We would have got hit by that car. When I was 10 years old, I was walking home from catechism school in Los Angeles when I noticed a dirty white car pulled over to the side of the road with its hood propped open. As I was walking by, a man with longish hair and kind of dirty looking popped out of the front of the hood. He told me that his car wasn't working, and then he kindly asked me if I could reach into his car and push the little button. At the time, I didn't know the little button he was talking about was actually just a car lighter. As I reached to push the button, he put his hands on my butt trying to push me into the car, saying, "No, you have to get all the way in the car." I screamed, and he said, Okay. I quickly got out of the car and started walking away. The man got into his car and turned it on. It wasn't even broken down. He then drove up to the side of me and said, "You don't want to come home with me?" I screamed, and he drove away. I ran all the way home. When I got home, I was so scared that I ran to my sister's room to tell her what happened, hoping that she wouldn't tell my parents, because I didn't want to get in any trouble. After I told her, she ran straight to my dad and told him what happened, and he called the police. The police showed up at my doorstep fairly quickly. As we sat down on the couch, they started taking notes on a piece of paper. The policeman then pulled out a book with a bunch of pictures of different men and asked me to point out the man I saw. They politely thanked me for my cooperation and then left. A few days later, they asked me to come down to the station and look at another book to spot out the man. I pointed out the man in 2 different books, and the police told my parents that the man was a known sex offender, but since nothing happened, they couldn't arrest him. Years later, my mom told me that he was arrested in Vegas doing what he tried to me on someone else. On my 9th birthday, I moved back to Michigan from Tennessee, and I lived in these condos. We had a park right next to my building, so my mom just watched me from the window while I played in the park. One day, me and my friends were playing at the park, and we see this guy watching us from his window. We just ignore it, but every time we go outside, he would do the same. For my 10th birthday party, I had a party at the park, and he was just sitting on his porch holding his phone. We didn't really think anything of it until a week later. I was at the park and I saw him on his front porch with a camera, just sitting there, and this just kept going on for months. He would always come out to the park and try to talk to me, and said he had a daughter my age, and if I ever wanted to come play with her, I could. One day I came home from school, and my mom and a bunch of cops are in the living room. She never told me what happened until I turned 14. Turns out he had a whole secret room that had pictures and video of me playing. One day his wife found the room, and she called the cops. I'm a male that's 13 years old, and I was 13 when this event happened. So anyways, I was asleep around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I heard some laughter coming from my basement. I thought it was my dad playing a joke on me. So in the morning, before he left, I asked him if he had been laughing at 3 a.m. in the morning. I know it was a weird question, but I asked him anyways. He told me no, and asked me what it sounded like. I told him it sounded exactly like his voice, but more hysterical and deeper. He just gave me a weird look and said I was probably having sleep paralysis. If you're familiar with that, you know that you can't move. And the thing is, I was fully mobile, meaning it wasn't sleep paralysis, and it was real. I am a female. It was a Thursday, and I had my alarm set for 6 a.m. because I had school. I woke up to my alarm blasting in my ear. I grabbed my phone and turned off the alarm. I was awake and was glued to my bed, so I decided to go onto Instagram. That's when I saw it, someone standing 1 foot away from me. My vision was a bit blurry, but I could see that she was wearing a nightgown with flowers, and she had long hair. Her legs were so pale. She went in front of my brother's bed, moving side to side gently, looking at me. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I went under my covers and started rubbing my eyes and accidentally scratched myself. That's when I realized I wasn't dreaming. I pulled the covers off and she was still there. All I could do was call my brother's name. For my brother's privacy, I'll just call him Jack. I whispered while crying, "Jack, use your flashlight." I said this about 5 times while crying louder. He heard me on the 5th time and woke up and grabbed his flashlight. That's when she vanished and my dog woke up. I was still scared and crying as I told my brother what happened. I got up and still went to school. When I got home later that day, I told my mom, and what she said still chills me to the bone. She said that a woman had died in her house and used to live there alone with her son. When she died, her son moved away, and that's when my mom rented the house. I am no longer comfortable being in this house. Please someone, help us. We don't know what to do. It's getting so bad. It's been bad over the last 20 years, but this is the worst by far. Both of my parents grew up in haunted houses, and of course my siblings and I have all grown up in haunted houses as well. At first my parents thought my brother just had an imaginary friend. His name was Joe and he lived in the closet. My brother woke up screaming in the middle of the night when I was a baby, so I don't remember. My parents ran in there and he had blood all over his sheets and 3 very long cuts on his back. They had bunk beds and my brother was on the bottom. My parents said he was pale and wouldn't say a word. Things calmed down for a really long time, until I was 10. I had one of my friends stay over, and we were staying up really late, playing games, and doing what little girls do. We started hearing scratching sounds coming from outside my door. I had a cat, so I thought it was her. So I went to open the door, but there was nothing there. We ended up shrugging it off. Then it started again, and the doorknob started to jiggle, and it slowly opened. There was a dark figure standing there, looking at us. It was out of breath, and its shoulders were going up and down. Then it lunged at us, and we screamed, causing my parents to come in running. Nothing and nobody was in the house. My friend never stayed the night at my house again, and we stopped being friends shortly after. 9 years later, just little things were happening, nothing too scary. My boyfriend went off to basic training, and I still lived with my parents when I was 19. I had a dog, Zeus, who was sleeping on my bed, and he's a yellow lab. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I had to be up at 8:30 for work. He woke me up growling. Then I heard a weird voice in my ear speaking a language I didn't understand. When I started to open my eyes, it started growling in my ears. I opened my eyes fast, and my door slammed. My dog was standing over me, with his hair standing up, looking like he was about to attack someone. Everyone was already at work, and I heard banging coming from my parents' room. I got Zeus off of me, and jumped out of bed, and ran to my parents' room. The cabinets were opening and closing fast, and things were being thrown everywhere, around the room. It wouldn't stop. I turned around and went to run out, but the door slammed shut. My dog was running around the house, barking and growling, and started running into the door. I said screw it, and ran out and grabbed some work clothes, and got my dog and got the hell out. I dropped off my dog at my friend's house and went to work early. When I got home, my parents' room was destroyed. My mother was crying, and my dad was pissed. I told them everything, and we decided not to talk about it again, and went on with the rest of the night. My brother still lived with my parents as well. That night, his door kept opening and closing, and I kept hearing running in the hallway, so I thought it was him. I slipped on my slippers and stomped to his room. I was gonna yell at him to knock off his stupid shit, and when I opened the door, he was snoring. I woke him up and he promised me it wasn't him. He told me to leave his door open to see if anything happens again. I'm halfway down the hallway and my brother yells at me to run to my room and not to look back. But of course, I turn around instead. As I turned around, I see a large black figure standing in the doorway staring at me. It had large red eyes. I froze and started to whimper. My brother, being the protective big brother, came charging out of his room, telling the thing to leave me alone, and then it disappeared. My brother ran to me and led me to my room and slept on the floor all night. I didn't sleep. Now a year later, I'm 21. My husband is away in the army at the moment, and we are waiting for our plumbing to be done at our new house. Last night we had a bad rainstorm. I woke up to growling again and couldn't move. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure with red eyes just staring at me, and it opened its mouth so wide it could fit my whole head in its mouth. It had huge sharp teeth and a long skinny tongue. It screamed in my ear, and my ears started to ring. I wanted to cover them, but I couldn't. My parents come running into my room, covering their ears, but it stopped mid-run when they saw the thing. My dad came running to me and picked me up and carried me to his room, and Zeus followed. I was finally able to move and started shaking uncontrollably. My brother still lives there, as well as his girlfriend. We heard her scream, and then she started banging on the door, and then my dad opened it, and she came running in, crying and shaking. We all started to ask where my brother was. Before she could answer, he came out of his room on his hands and feet with black eyes, just staring at us. We all froze, none of us knew what to do. My brother then popped his neck and started running for us. My dad slammed his door shut and locked it. My brother ran right into it. My mom was screaming for it to get the hell out of the house and just kept repeating this while things were being thrown, then it goes quiet. My dad opens the door and my brother was passed out on the floor with his nose bleeding. When my brother woke up, we told him everything. He didn't remember a thing, but remembers hearing screaming, and then it all went black. Nobody slept last night, and we all called in and are trying to figure this out. Now it's the next night, and it's 11 o'clock. We are hearing growling and scratching through the entire house. We can't do this again. Please help. I will keep you updated as soon as I can. Thank you. This happened a few years ago. I haven't touched any technology after this happened until now. So I've been using technology since I was a kid. At 12, I learned how to write scripts and programs to hack into systems, and ever since, I was hooked. Fast forward, I'm in my second year of university. I'm now quite good at hacking, albeit somewhat cocky. Throughout high school, I made a lot of money hacking. People would come to me normally to recover their hacked social media accounts, or hack into their boyfriend's phone to read their text messages. I was known as the guy to go to if you wanted something hacked. Even my school occasionally came to me for help if some script Kindle shut down the school's website with a low orbit ion cannon. Like I said, I made a lot of money doing this throughout high school. Halfway through my second year of university, I started getting bored of this. The money was good, but there was no longer a thrill. One of my friends told me about a cool thing called the dark web. I had heard a little bit about the dark web before, but it never seemed that interesting to me. My friend told me how there was full-on drugstores, weapons dealers, hackers for hire. As I was a hacker and a stoner, the dark web seemed right up my alley. When I got home that day, I fired up my computer and did some quick Googling. With my vast knowledge of technology, it didn't take me long to get set up and install Tor and Tails onto my computer. I sped through the hidden wiki, finding most of the websites boring or dead. I texted my friend asking if he had any interesting links. He replied, "Here's a few of the ones I use." He sent me about 5 links, 2 directories. I decided to click on the second one and see what I could find. I scrolled through the directory for a few minutes. He was right about how interesting the dark web was. I couldn't figure out where to start, so I clicked on a chat room. The website looked old and primitive, but surprisingly, there was one person online. I started talking to him. He seemed kinda shady, but it was better than scrolling through a bunch of dead websites. He said he's been on the dark web for a while. Finally finding someone with vast knowledge of what's on the dark web, I asked him if he had any interesting links. He sent me a link, then immediately left the website. I had no idea what was hidden behind the link. Looking back on it, oh god, I wish I didn't click it. At the time, my curiosity overwhelmed me. I clicked on the link without giving it a second thought. After it loaded, I was presented with a pop-up box. It said in red text, "If you don't know what's next, you're probably in the wrong place." There were 2 buttons, continue and leave. I instantly clicked continue, the biggest mistake of my life. It brought up a black screen page with blood red text on the top of the screen, "The Freak Show." In the middle of the screen there was a chat box. A message popped up with someone titled admin. He said hello. I said, "Hello, interesting website you got here." He replied, "Thank you. Are you here to view the show today?" I thought to myself, what show? Out of curiosity, I replied, "Yes." He said, "Since you're a first-time viewer, it will cost you 500 via Bitcoin in order to view the show. Future viewings are free." From all the money I made hacking, I had enough to fuel my curiosity, so I went ahead and paid the 500. After paying him, I was surprised. I was given a zip file instead of a link. I had developed a custom-made antivirus that appeared to work well, so I risked downloading it. When I went to unzip the folder, there was 2 files inside, an installer and a file named readme.txt. I started opening the text file. It said, "Do not send this installer to anyone or else." I went ahead and closed the text file and opened the installer. It took about 15 minutes to install, which was strange for my computer. After installing, it opened automatically. Across the screen, it said, "Hello, welcome to the Freak Show. We use a custom program for our streams instead of live streaming on Tor. Due to Tor being kinda slow, we also needed extra security." After about 10 seconds, the screen changed to a countdown with a chat room next to it. At this point, I started to feel whatever happened next would not be good. The timer displayed that there was 30 minutes until the stream started. I set my screen name to James Kent 157, not my real name, but I needed an alias. I said hi in the chat, but was ignored. I waited 30 minutes, and after the timer hit 0, a video feed began. On the screen there was a guy with a mask, with 3 people side by side in front of him. He started speaking with a voice changer. "Welcome to the 26th stream of the Freak Show. We're happy to see all of our old viewers here and a few new ones. We will randomly choose who gets to choose who to kill first and how to kill them." At this point I realized I was fucked. I was in too much shock to close the window. I watched as the feed turned into a bunch of names scrolling by until it landed on someone named Gore725. I watched as he made his commands. First stab him in the kneecaps, then cut off his fingers, After that, gouge his eyeballs. When that's finished, drill into his stomach, and to finish him off, burn him with hot metal. I watched as the sicko did all of this. I watched the victim scream in pain. After everything was done, he said, "Now to the next one." After he said that, I snapped out of it and went to close the page. When I clicked the X, it said, "Sorry, no leaving midstream." I was trapped. The wheel popped up again, and this time it landed on me. I couldn't respond. Instead, I typed in the chat, "You sick fucks, why are you doing this?" I was met in the chat with people calling me a pussy and a dumbass. I then said, "I'm calling the police." I shouldn't have said that. The owner of the website said, "Call the police and you'll be on the next week's stream, Logan." This made my heart freeze. He knew my real name. He then said my parents' names, my address, school, age, and IP in the chat. I immediately went to the task manager to close the Tor program. As soon as the task messenger opened, it said, "Not responding." The guy said, "Don't try that in chat." I pulled the plug on my computer, and without a doubt, my screen went black. I ran to my parents' room and told them what happened and said we had to move. They believed me and called the police. The police took care of everything and put us under police protection. Within a few months, they found the website owner. He was a 30-year-old man who lived off a combination of welfare and the money he made from this red room. It was many years later before I started using technology again. The dark web is an abyss of terrible things. If you're smart, you'll stay on the surface web, but I can't control what you do. So I've never really talked about this, but it all started 3 years ago when I was talking to this girl for a little bit. Her name was Natalie. She lived in an older house and had the entire basement to herself. I remember her saying things like how her house was haunted. I didn't really believe her until this one night. So me and my friend Nick are spending the night at her house, and I remember my friend laying down on the couch at like 9:30, and he was just staring blankly at the wall. I didn't think anything was wrong, and I thought he was just messing around, so I started calling his name. "Yo, Nick, Nick, Nick." Nothing I said could get a response from him. Meanwhile, I was across the room, and Natalie was sitting on her bed. After about a minute of him just staring blankly, he jumps off the couch and says, "I don't mess with that. I don't mess with that." Freaking out, and Natalie started laughing. It didn't really dawn on me until later that I think she knew what was happening. Anyways, I started laughing too, thinking it was a joke. About 5 minutes pass, and he calms down and sits back on the couch. This is where things get a little creepy and interesting. She had a screen door in her room that opened outside. I specifically remember as soon as I took 2 steps out of her room, every single light in her room, including outlets, all blew out and it was pitch black. It got really creepy for a second. We tried everything, and the only thing in her room that would work was a lamp next to the couch, right next to Nick's head. Anyways, this was all kind of new to me, and I didn't really know what to think about the situation. I then remembered things getting weird in the room, like Natalie was getting super agitated over the littlest things and wouldn't let me sleep in her bed. So I was like, whatever, I'll just sleep on the floor at the foot of her bed. I remember I couldn't fall asleep that night. I was laying there for a while everyone else was asleep when I had this sleep paralysis type of feeling. I couldn't move or anything. I remember this happened to me once when I was young, and all I could think to do was to pray and start saying the Our Father prayer in my head. When about halfway through it, it stopped and I just tried to go back to bed. About 30 seconds pass and it hits me again that I can't move. This is giving me chills as I type this. So I start praying again, and halfway through the prayers it stops. At this point I was like, whatever this is gone, until about 30 seconds pass again, and this time it's much more frightening. I remember it felt like someone plunged me onto an outlet, like I was being shocked through my whole body, and I was kind of shaking or whatever. It was just holding me down. I remember trying to move my arms as hard as I could to rip the blanket off of Nick to wake him up and help me, but in my head I was saying Our Fathers, and it left halfway through again. At this point I was freaking out. I was literally scared for the next few months after this, and I slept in the same room as my mom for a month or so. It took me a while to kind of make sense of what happened that night, but I think some entity or demon or something, I don't know, tried messing with my friend Nick, and when I laughed and taunted it, it targeted me. But this story is not over. So this happened about 2 years ago when I moved into my new house. which I still live in today. I remember my aunt was visiting, and it was late night, around 2 a.m. I was just chilling, playing video games, doing my thing when I hear a weird sound to my left and right. I had my gaming headset on, so I ignored it and kept playing. When I thought I heard the same sound for the second time from behind my bed, I took my headset off and waited, trying to hear it again to find out what it was. I sat there for like 2 minutes, just waiting, when I heard the sound right next to me. Woo. It's literally all I could make out, and it was just weird and creeped me the fuck out. So I ran to my mom's room and told her something was making sounds in my room. And she was like, oh, it's probably the sprinkler system or some other shit outside, and went outside to look. I remember I walked back into the hall to my room and stood there waiting for my mom to come back inside. When I literally heard the loudest woo in my ear, I ran out of the house crying and freaking out, and my mom thought I was crazy. I remember hearing a voice another time while I was trying to sleep, and I just kept telling it to go away. Since then I haven't heard any other crazy shit, though I do get sleep paralysis sometimes. The most recent experience, I had what was like a presence of a woman in my room, and I couldn't move. I don't know, all this stuff is just kind of creepy to me. When I was younger in the 60s, we lived in an old house built before the Civil War. It was up in Oldham County, Kentucky, in an area known as the Devil's Backbone, on Dawkins Road. I was around 12 years old and had an encounter I would never forget. One night, I was unable to sleep and I was laying on my side when I got this very uncomfortable feeling. I turned on my back and saw a young man with dark hair and a mustache staring at me from the foot of my bed. He was wearing clothing from the 1800s. I looked at him for a while before I lost my nerve and ducked under the covers. When I looked back up, he was gone. Several weeks later, I was upstairs in my brother's room and I was home alone. Suddenly, someone loudly ran up the stairs to the door. I opened it only to find a cold breeze. I left the house until everyone else came home. Sometime later, I was in town with my dad. We met an old man that said he lived in the house when he was a boy. He said the house was haunted and that a young musician hung himself from the second-story window, which was my brother's room. I'm a water treatment plant operator. Been doing this for about a decade. I've been the night shift guy my whole career. The nights are normally quiet and can be boring if everything is going as planned. My plant has a few different buildings. The oldest is 60 or so years old. The main building is where I spend a majority of my night shifts, and is only roughly 20 years old. For more backstory of the area, this used to be a booming, energized area. This area was littered with railroad tracks and drifters coming and going on the trains. Our farms and factories were very bountiful back then. Now that you all understand that with success in the area, there's also a darkness. From the settling of the area, wars with natives, and even into the 30s and 40s of people being killed on train wrecks and bad business deals, the grounds are laced with darkness. The silence of night shifts can be eerie all on its own. Lots of bumps and bangs in the dim lit darkness. On the night that I'm about to speak about, everything started as normal. I came around sunset, got the nightly Passover, and began my work. Around midnight, I had to do my rounds around the whole property while getting the nightly pump numbers. I made my rounds with nothing but a flashlight around the main building. The oldest building is a good walking distance away from the main building. I set out in the darkness, heading for that building. I must also add that we aren't in the nicest area of the town. However, I'm a big guy, and I can hold my own. As I made my walk, I got an uneasy feeling. I've gotten this before, but I have a job to do, and nothing came of it. I rounded the corner and unlocked the door. As I did this, the hairs on my back and neck stood up. Again, I have a job to do though. I opened the door and there stood nothing. I walked in and proceeded to get my numbers. As I turned to shut the door, I looked down the hallway to see a woman in pure white looking at me through the other door. I almost jumped out of my boots and pissed myself a little. As I came back to reality, I once again made eye contact with this entity. As soon as I met her gaze, everything in me said, "Hey, your life is in danger, buddy." Her face was distorted and started to shift around. I was now frozen as she shifted into what looked like an Indian warrior. His eyes were glowing. As I got to my feet, he shifted into a huge wolf creature. The growls were chilling to say the least. It snarled, then ran towards me. I didn't even have time to shut the door. I ran as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder. I felt as if it was trying to bite my backside. It got a hold of my pant leg and tore it to shreds. I stumbled and rolled, but somehow managed to get back on my feet. I darted to the main building, and as I shut the door, I heard a loud thud on the other side. I locked the doors and cowered inside. I could hear the thing growling and scratching at the walls. I got the courage to look out the window, just to end up face to face with a white lady again. I called the police and had them sit with me until the sun came up. No one else has ever seen the white lady since. It's still quite freaky, but I had a job to do. This happened just 2 days ago, and I'm saying this now because I forgot about him, but he has just messaged me. Now that that is out of the way, this story isn't about a red room or any fake shit. Trust me, I've been on the deep web for 3 years. Not once have I seen one of those things. I mean, I've seen videos of people getting killed, but not live feeds or anything. But the site I so happened to come across, that had a link that was a bunch of random letters, and if you use Tor or something along those lines, you know what I mean. This link was sent to me via email, and the email read as this: "Click this if you dare," with a smiley face. Now I was thinking probably exactly the same thing that you're thinking right now. I'd either heard or read that, and another damn troll was trying to scare people. So I clicked the link, and it was nothing like I hadn't seen before. Drugs, blood, cheesy sound effects, and I was just sitting there laughing it off because I was thinking, I guessed right. But when I clicked the image of the weed or some shit, I was sent to another page, and out of the page that I was currently in. Keep in mind, I have a VPN and also an IP scrambler for safety reasons. But when I was sent to this page, for the first time out of 3 years that I had been on the deep web, I had never had a site switch to a different site on me. So I was thinking I must have misclicked, but then it made my full screen a black web page. But when I clicked on my screen, an error message popped up saying, "We're sorry, but we are afraid to tell you that you cannot leave this page. We are sending you to an admin right now. Please wait." So out of pure curiosity, I stayed and let it load. Then a video popped up, or should I say a webcam. I was thinking that I was going to be talking to someone about the site that was clearly fake, and then a person with a normal face, top hat, black trench coat, and also black gloves appeared. Keep in mind that since stuff like this had happened before, I wear stuff that doesn't allow you to see my skin color, including gloves that go all the way up to my elbows. Yes, I know that those are mostly meant for females, but I custom made mine, so they have black widows crawling down them, and it looks pretty badass. I was wearing a plain white hoodie and a hockey mask, and also I kept my hoodie up. When the webcam appeared, I wasn't scared since there was no way that they could see what I looked like, so that just pissed him off. I got closer to the camera and said, "Can you see my face now?" That seemed to anger him, and he said, "Don't test me. You come to my site without an invite?" After that I went back in my chair and said, "Okay, first of all, I got sent this link via email, and this site is clearly fake. I mean, what do you take me for, a fool?" That's when he said, "I use this fake webpage to click the link via the picture, and then I send them here. It seems you did that." Then I replied, "I did that because I wanted to see how horribly overpriced a bag of fake ass weed was going to be, and it seems that you're the drug dealer. So can I have some weed, please?" I said that last part, just to fuck with him. And then he got really mad, and kinda did the noise that a 10-year-old makes when they get pissed. And he said, "Don't test me." I knew this prick wasn't going to do anything, so I so-called tested him again, and said, "I ain't your teacher, but if you want a math quiz, I'll be glad to give you one." He replied, "That's it. I'm getting your address, and we're gonna meet." "Oh no, please don't. I don't want to meet you. You're too scary." Then I turned my IP scrambler and VPN off so he could get my real IP, because I had a little surprise for him. Then he typed my IP in the chat box, and I replied, "Oh, good job. You found it. It seems you are getting the hang of this stuff. How would you like it if I give you your IP?" He said, "Do it. More likely you can't." So I used a couple of programs, and maybe 3 minutes later, both of us were doing the same thing when I said, "Got it, and I also got some other things too." So I typed in the chat box his name, address, phone number, and also the same thing for his sister and his mother. I must have scared the living shit out of him. Oh god, I wish you saw his face. I was laughing so damn hard, and when I was done, he said, "I'm coming to meet you. You better prepare to die." I had some illegal weapons that I had already bought off the deep web. A mini Uzi, a shotgun with a drum mag, and an also very deadly military grade sniper rifle. And then I said, "Oh, please do come over. I would really like to meet you." And then I moved to the left because the guns were sitting behind me. They were in the dark, so you couldn't see them from the angle of the webcam, but the light of the PC screen sent a bright light beam to the wall where my guns were sitting. And keep in mind, I live in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, and the nearest house is 4 miles south or north of me, so I could shoot my guns and no one would hear them. I say this because what he said next. "Those things are fake." And I said in a childless way, "Oh no, they're not." And that's when he said, like most people would say, "Prove it." So I took the sniper rifle and then grabbed the tripod and connected it. I used this so many times that I know the difference metal and plastic make when they barely touch, let alone lock into each other. It seems like he didn't know that sound so normally, so he needed me to shoot to show him that it was real. So I put the sniper rifle out of my window, then shot a tree about a half a mile away. And it was an easy hit, because this thing was such a beast when it comes to shooting. And then he said, "I ain't afraid of a sniper. The one that I was afraid of was that shotgun." So I took the shotgun and shot that one too. And then he jumped on and said, "Stop with the sound effects." And I said, "Okay, first of all, that isn't possible. And second, I want to meet your sister and your mother. What weapon do you want me to bring with me?" And then he screamed, "Please don't. Leave them out of this. I will leave and we won't meet. I'm sorry I scared you." And just like that, he shut down his site and never bothered me again until that message. The message reads, "Thank you for not attacking my family. I'm sorry for what I did, and I want you to know that the site is shut down." I only shot those weapons to scare him. I wasn't actually going to do shit. I ain't a murderer. I'm a hacker. I'm a drug user. I'll admit it. Weed is my go-to, and I buy that off my friend. If, however, I want to get something a little heavier, like acid or coke, I just order it off the dark web. It's surprisingly simple, just a few clicks, some Bitcoin transfers, and then boom, I have the acid or coke in my P.O. box. But I'm also a curious guy. The dark web has always intrigued me. Up until a few days ago, I had only been on there to buy drugs off the site that my friend gave me. But late one night, I was sober and home alone, which was a rare thing for me. So since I was bored, I decided to boot up the Tor browser and try to see some sort of fucked up shit on the dark web. If you've ever been on the dark web, you know that you cannot just search up red rooms or Hitman for Hire and get results. No, you have to find links to these types of websites. So I hopped back onto Google and tried to find some links to the messed up websites. I know it's weird to actively be searching for the worst, but as soon as I got on the dark web that night, I just had some morbid curiosity overcome me. Anyway, I spent a little while trying to find some links. Everything I found was either too tame for me, or the links didn't work. At this point I was ready to give up, and I wish I had. But, in one final attempt, I clicked on Reddit, hopping onto the deep web subreddit. I didn't think I would find anything, so I just scrolled through the hot posts for half an hour before sorting by new. Then I found it. One simple post titled "Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services." In the text box of the post was what seemed to be just a random assortment of numbers and letters. ZY3DKTCUBKQ2Y3 for those that are curious. It took my tired brain a few seconds to figure out what it was, but I realized pretty quickly it was a link, presumably to a Hitman site. So, I decided to paste a link into my deep web browser, and what do you know, it worked. But before I decided to go any further, I figured I should go back to the OP's profile to see if they posted any other dark web links. However, when I went back to the post in question, the OP's profile was deleted, which was weird. Anyway, I reopened my dark web tab and hopped onto the site. Up along the top of the website was the name, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services. And next to that, what looked like to be a skull inside of crosshairs. I chuckled when I saw it. This site must be fake. Upon scrolling down, however, I was not disappointed. There was a paragraph of text on black background and a small box to the right of the text that just said, "Place an order." The text was the main part though, as it took up most of the page. It read, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services offers everything from acid attacks, crippling, blinding, castration, torture, beating, and good old death. We have the lowest prices out of any other company running similar services, and we are worldwide. We have a dedicated and experienced group of staff based all over the world. So if you need someone to be assassinated, or maybe just want them scarred for life, don't hesitate to contact us. As I laughed, this had to be satire, right? Hell, I was even tempted to order it on someone, just to see what would happen. Ironically, I actually had a half-decent job, so I could afford it too. Better not risk it though, I thought to myself. I was about to close my computer and call it a night when I heard a knock at the door. I live alone, so it's unusual to get visitors, especially this late at night. But when I opened the door, it was just my good buddy Mark, who also happened to be my dealer. As I opened the door, he didn't hesitate to shove a big baggie full of pot in my face. "This dude is the best shit I've had in a minute. We gotta try some." I couldn't say no. Cut to a couple hours later. It was the morning and Mark and I were chilling on the couch, both blazed. He suddenly decides to get up, I assume going over to get some leftover pizza. But he walks over to my desk and computer. "Slayer's Assassination? Are you gonna kill someone or something?" "What?" "Your computer, dude. It's got some hacker shit on it. It's a deep web, man. Don't mess with it." At this point, I was still on the couch, half asleep, not paying full attention. However, I sat up pretty fast when he said the words, "Hey, let's hire a hitman on you." I hopped up and walked over to my PC. Part of my brain was screaming, "No, what the hell are you doing?" But a majority of my brain was thinking how funny would it be to hire a hitman on myself. So I agree. I did make him get off my chair though, because I didn't want him seeing my credit card numbers as I transferred some Bitcoin. At the end, after I wrote down my personal details, like my address, age, and even a photo, I selected what I wanted to happen to me. I selected a plain old assassination, as it was actually cheaper than some of the other things. I could have paid an extra couple of grand to be beaten before death, but even my high brain didn't want to splash too much cash into this. Anyway, I placed the order, and then got a confirmation email. And boom, it was done. A couple of clicks and I had ordered myself on the dark web. Mark and I laughed about it for a while, but then he left about a half hour later. I fell back asleep not too long after. I wake up around 9 a.m., which meant I got about 6 hours of sleep, even though it felt more like 3. I got up out of bed, threw on some track pants and a cotton shirt, and brewed myself some coffee before sitting down to play some games and just enjoy my Sunday. You can imagine how shocked I was when I saw that I had ordered my death the previous night. Even though I thought it was bullshit, I still felt a pit open up in my stomach. Even when I was high, I usually made sensible decisions. I chuckled. Not like I could remember it anyway, but I guess Mark's new shit was really good. I would assume a normal human being would do something else, but I was still out of it from the night before, so I just carried on with my day. I was a little bit more paranoid, sure, but I just assumed that it was all bullshit. I even laughed at the email I got from the website, saying that their human had been dispatched and was on its way. It was like ordering a package from Amazon. I was tempted to email back and ask for same-day delivery, but I didn't need to ask, because that's exactly what I got. I didn't see it arrive, but it was around the time I started cooking myself a shitty dinner that I noticed a blacked out sedan parked on the other side of the road of my house. I didn't live in a rural area, but there was a lot of trees and bushes between each of the houses on my street. At that point, I was freaking out. What if the sight was real? Even though I'm a big guy, I was freaking out. I don't own any weapons, aside from a slightly larger than average kitchen knife. Fuck it, I'm confronting it, I decided. I put my hoodie on and slid the knife into my front pocket before waltzing out of my house and walking right up to the driver's side window of the vehicle. Even I was astonished by my own courage. Knocking on the window, nothing happened. It was rather anticlimactic. I was fully prepared to have the fight of my life, all because I did something really dumb when I was baked. But like I said, nothing happened. I even put my head right up to the window to try to get a better look to see what's inside. I could barely see inside the car, but I could still make out that there was 2 empty seats. No one was even inside. I got all hyped up for nothing. I decided to wait out by the car for a bit, but after about a half an hour, I was hungry and decided to go back inside to take the dinner out of the oven. I swear, it was only a minute between me going inside to take out my dinner and looking back out the window, and the sedan was gone. I didn't even hear it go. Guess I'm eating dinner with my curtains closed and doors locked, I muttered to myself. I just started to calm down when the power shut off. It was still sunny outside, and coupled with the car, I knew this was a real deal. I had signed my own death warrant. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door, and I hid under my bed. I couldn't call the cops. What would I say? Oh yes, hey sir, turns out I was super high and paid someone $5,000 to kill me, and now he's arrived. Send an officer, please. So I stayed hiding under my bed, and I still am now. I've been here for an hour, now writing this. I know I'm screwed. Just a few minutes ago, I heard my back door slowly creak open. This piece of writing may seem humorous to you, the reader, but in reality, as you read this, I'm under my bed praying to God to let me go. But I know that won't happen. My bedroom door just opened, and I can hear a big pair of black boots. The dark web ruined my life. I went on only because my uncle used to. He was really good with computers, so I guess I got my skill with technology from him. I'm not going to say how I got on there, because I don't want to make it easier for others to make the same mistake I did. Anyways, after a little while of looking around, I found a link titled Hypnotizing Scenery. I don't know what compelled me to click on it. I hadn't planned on clicking on anything at all. I just wanted to look around for a bit to soothe my curiosity, I suppose. When I clicked on it though, well, it was weird. At first it just had a bunch of normal scenery, pictures of mountains, old castles, oceans, normal stuff. Then the pictures started changing faster and faster. I couldn't even really make out what the pictures were anymore. I saw a lot of red, like maybe blood, on clothes. Maybe a mattress. I'm not sure, but it also looked like there was words all over the pictures. I couldn't read what they said in time before it switched to pictures again. Suddenly, it ended with a blank screen with white text that read, "Good luck." I feel I should mention that this was all in about 30 seconds. After it ended, I shut everything down and got into bed. The next morning, I wake up to a horrible migraine. It just wouldn't go away. When I went to school, everything seemed so loud and annoying. This one kid, Anthony in particular, was driving me insane. He kept poking me with a pencil, as he did every day. I'd tell him to stop and he would just laugh. As he did this, I kept thinking how great it would feel to just rip his arm out of its socket. Maybe poke him with a pencil in the throat, see how he likes it. I decided the next time he poked me, I would kill him. 1, 2, 3, poke. I snapped my head around, got up, ripped the pencil out of his hand so hard he fell out of his chair. I got on top of him and held the pencil to his throat, pressing harder and harder. He was grasping at my arms, trying to get me off of him, but I felt stronger than ever. He couldn't manage to push me off, as a trickle of blood began running down the side of his neck. That's when the principal, the vice principal, and 3 janitors managed to pull me off. Suddenly I heard all the screaming and commotion. All 35 students of the class crowded against the wall in the corner, with the teacher gasping for air, crying, and backing up against her desk. My parents came and got me 20 minutes later. The cops were never called, and I guess the kids' parents decided not to call them and not press charges. Not sure why. I would have. I was expelled from school, however, and my parents were pretty angry. I don't know what came over me, as I had that pencil against his throat. All I could think about was how great I felt, invincible, free, and powerful. Now, I just felt like the same 16-year-old, 5'3", 120 pound, small girl I was the day before, and my migraine was back. Great. I remember that it all started to fade away as I tackled Anthony. I tried to get some sleep, but all I could think about is how he got away. I wanted him dead, bloody on the ground and grasping for breath. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to be the last thing he saw before he died. I couldn't believe I was thinking this way. I had never been a violent person, but now that's all I was thinking about. I didn't care who it was. I just wanted to kill someone. Not just kill them, but torture them. I decided to go back to the page to see if I could find some answers. It had to be the link that did this to me, turned me into some kind of monster. There it was, hypnotizing scenery. This time when I clicked on it though, it was a list, a set of rules. Number 1, always finish the kill. If you don't, the migraine will worsen, and quickly, you'll be dead within 4 months. Number 2, take it slow. Don't finish it off too soon, or the migraine will return faster. Number 3, don't be stupid. Don't get caught. Number 4, leave the mark. Something for them to remember me. A small J carved into their forehead. Number 5, you are my creation. I've made you to continue my legacy. Don't fight it. It's not worth it. I'm now 26 years old and I've killed countless numbers of people. Anthony was my first official kill, only 3 months after the incident, when I couldn't handle my migraines anymore. I don't think that I'm me anymore. My creator will probably see this, and it might end me, but I wanted to write this as a warning before the monster takes over again. Don't go on the dark web. It's not worth it. I love Halloween. I look forward to it each year with great enthusiasm and excitement. The weather turns crisp and the leaves start to change, and the holiday buzz begins to vibrate once more. It's a catalyst, a kickstarter for the final stretch of another year. Nature slowly exhales color in the gorgeous flourish of red, orange, and yellow as the days begin to shorten. Summer clothes are put away and the apple cider makes its comeback. Unfortunately, I'm the only one in my friend group that enjoys the darker side of Halloween. I'm talking about the scary aspect, horror movies, haunted houses, and ghost tours. My friends like the concept and the theme that hangs over this time of the year, but when it comes to actually participating in these events, well, they are usually nowhere to be found. Each year I tolerate their cowardice and typically end up joining the group in whatever activity they decide upon. But this year I wanted more. This year I finally decided to go out on my own and really embrace the scary side of Halloween. I pleaded, begged a couple of my friends to join me in this endeavor, but they backed out apologetically, claiming they weren't interested, and so I set out alone. I scoured the internet and local papers, searching for something that would please my horror hunger pains. I didn't want some dumbed down haunted house filled with giggling and screaming children. I also didn't want to do anything that was too crowded. After much fruitless searching, I saw an advertisement for something called Corn Maze 43. There is very little information about it, and when I checked out the address, I saw that it was in a very rural part of the state. It promised scares unlike you'd ever seen before. With such confidence boasting, I decided to give it a try. I checked the calendar and decided I was going to go on Halloween night. If it bored me, I could always join my friends somewhere and engage in whatever lame activity they were doing. I didn't particularly care that I was going alone, but some company to share the experience with would have been nice. In any case, once Halloween night rolled around, I was tingling with excitement. That night, around 8, I hopped in my car and headed for the attraction. The countryside blurred past my windows, illuminated by the full moon. I rolled down my window and let the cold air in. After about an hour, I checked my GPS again and saw that I was getting close. The road continued to twist and wind through uninhabited country, a rolling, silent expanse of grass, rolling hills, and peaceful serenity. As I got closer, now only half a mile away, I wondered if I was going the right way. I didn't see any signs of life, nor signs for the corn maze. Just as I was about to give up, utterly disappointed, I saw a single wooden post hammered into the earth along the roadside. Written vertically along it in black paint were the words, Corn Maze 43, with an arrow pointing down the dirt road that I had almost missed. Rejuvenated, I turned the wheel and began to bump down the narrow road. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. As I left a trail of dust in my wake, I scanned my surroundings and realized I was entering a massive cornfield. The stalks rose high around me, and the road continued to snake erratically through the rows of the still farmland. I rounded a bend and hit my brakes, heart leaping into my throat. My headlights illuminated the end of the road directly in front of me. A wall of corn boxed my car in from all sides, and I saw I was not the only visitor tonight. Another car parked in front of me, unmoving and dark. Where was everyone though? I at least expected some sort of attraction center or booth, but there was none in sight. I turned my car off and got out, slightly confused. My boots crunched over the gravel as I wandered over to the car parked in front of mine. I glanced inside and saw it was empty. I scratched my head and gnawed at my lip. I scanned the walls of corn around me and something caught my attention. It was a divide, a narrow rectangular of darkness that led into the field. Impaled in the earth next to the entrance was another wooden post that read Maze 43. If another car hadn't been there, I would have gone home. This seemed like an old attraction, some relic of previous years, but since I knew I wasn't alone, I decided to go check it out. If I entered the maze and I realized my assumptions were correct, I would just leave. I went back to my car to retrieve a flashlight. Clicking it on, I swung the beam back to the entrance and almost suffered a heart attack. Standing directly in front of the maze was a person clothed in a red cloak. A hood was pulled low over their face, and jutting from the oval of darkness was a long, black beak. I placed my hand over my chest and slowed my racing heart. It was a man wearing a mask. The attraction manager. It had to be. Hello? I raised my hand to him. The man didn't move. I saw your ad, I continued, staring at the odd bird masked man. Is this the right place for the haunted corn maze? After a moment, the masked man stepped to the side and pointed a red gloved hand at the entrance. His robe fluttered in the wind, and he remained silent. I saw dark plastic eyes glittering out at me from the shadow of his hood. A crow's mask. Do I need to pay anything? I asked. The man pointed down the long, open throat of corn. Okay, I'm going in, I said, making my way towards it. I kept the light beam off of him, but as I passed the man, I couldn't help but look at his face. The long beak and beady plastic eyes stared back. With the man behind me, I entered the maze. The walls of corn rose over my head and shifted in the wind. It sounded like dozens of people were sprinting past me, mere feet away, unseen. I felt the first of the excited fear, but knew it only stemmed from the total isolation I was encased in. I continued my trek, twisting and winding through the maze, passing intersections and bends, turning abrupt corners, and choosing new pathways. As I walked, I kept expecting someone to jump out and scare me, but nothing did. In fact, I hadn't stumbled across anything remotely frightening. After about 35 minutes, I was ready to leave. Frustrated, I turned around, determined to piece together from memory the path back to my car. As I turned, I noticed something off the beaten path inside the cornfield. I squinted and shined my light on it. It was a double-door vault, like a weathered bulkhead. Painted across the rusty doors were the words, Corn Maze 44. Intrigued, I left the path and pushed through the corn towards it. What was this all about? Was this part of the attraction? It had to be. But why was it so hidden? It didn't make much sense, but I was so desperate to discover something exciting, so I decided to inspect it. I tried the handle and found it opened easily. I shined a light down into the gasping mouth of darkness before me. Concrete stairs descended to an equally unimpressive hallway composed of the same plain faced concrete. I thought for a second, then shrugged. Screw it, let's see what this is all about. If nothing else, I might have a good story to tell my friends. I crept down the stairs, shining my flashlight ahead of me. The air smelled moldy and stale, like no one had been down here in years. I reached the bottom of the stairs and my light was swallowed up by the long expanse of the hallway. I started to walk, my boots echoed off the walls, and everything suddenly was very quiet. I kept walking. There was no branching passageways or alternate routes, just one continuous tongue of barren concrete stretching out before me. After about 10 minutes of walking, I started to think that it was a waste of time. Seconds before turning back, a repeating instinct tonight. My light caught another door. It was at the top of another small flight of stairs, leading back to the surface. Curiously, I ascended. I placed my hand on the cold iron and pushed. With a great creaking groan, the door opened. I blinked as light flooded inside, a dim, gloomy wash of dull color. I clicked my light off and stepped out to the other side. I looked onto the world, and my breath was robbed from my lungs. I felt a deep charge erupt in my stomach, and my senses were overwhelmed with the impossible. Endless cornfields stretched as far as the eye could see, disappearing in the overcast horizon. Jolting from the earth, littering the cornfields, were enormous structures of pure black. They rose up like faceless skyscrapers, windowless and perfect in their slick design. They were rectangular and appeared to be made from some unknown rock. They towered over the fields, their summits nothing more than a blank, flat surface. Perched atop the dozen looming formations were hundreds of motionless birds, but they were huge, easily 6 or 7 feet in length. Their long beaks and folded wings were the color of midnight. Their bodies were sickly thin. I traced the birds across the sky, catching a few in mid-flight. They were flocking towards the great structures from the cornfields. I felt my stomach turn as my eyes settled on the expanse of swaying stalks. Littering the earth were endless wood crosses, erect without order. Nailed to the crosses were men and women, bloodied and in agony. With terrifying realization, I saw that each person had a pumpkin shoved over their head, completely encasing it. They looked like crucified scarecrows, alive and squirming in torment. But it didn't end there. Impregnated in each one of the pumpkin was some kind of hose. I could see orange fluid pulsing through it, a continuous flow. I traced the hoses up to their origin and felt my blood turn to ice. Hanging in the sky was an absolutely titanic human body. It was upside down and naked, its male sexuality shockingly visible. It was wrapped in thick chains, the iron crisscrossing over the enormous being's chest. Binding its ankles was a second coil of chain. I craned my head back, mouth agape, and traced the endless link to the cloud-filled sky, where it disappeared. Whatever this nightmare hung from, I couldn't see it, the overcast heavens obscuring the source. The hanging giant was unmoving, its colossus body a living statue of human flesh. I ran my eyes along the lengths of its upside-down body and felt my knees tremble as I gazed upon its head. A fat orange thing wedged itself on top of the man's shoulders. Protruding from the rigid exterior were countless hoses, snaking, swaying, descending from the thing in the sky. Each hose ended at the crucified humans, the tubing rammed into the pumpkin-headed people, pumping them full of that foul orange fluid. I saw all of this in an instant. A freight train of horrified amazement that slammed into my eyes with the full force of a locomotive. I stepped back, swinging my gaze from the upside-down giant in the sky to the crucified humans in the fields, and then over towards the towering black constructs that held the mass of birds. All sense of reason and logic was eradicated in an instant. A sledgehammer obliterating the fragile glass orb that had once been my mind. I fell to my knees, unable to hold myself up. Everything I had ever understood rushed out of me in a bluster of disbelief and crippling impossibility. And that's when I felt something grab the back of my neck. I tried to scream, but the pain was too great for such a natural escape. I was lifted off my feet and turned around to face my captor. I recoiled as I gazed on the thing that held me. It was an ogre-like creature, a pale, gnarled thing with meaty hands that gripped me like a vice. It was easily 3 times as tall as me, and its drooling, crooked mouth leered down at me. Rising from its back was a net filled with a mountain of pumpkins, of all shapes and sizes. Their weight was so great that it forced the creature to bend over, pressing down towards the earth. Again, I tried to scream, its bulbous, slightly pink eyes staring down at me. I raised my hands and tried to pry his fingers from my throat, but it was useless. The ogre gurgled something and then began to walk, taking me with it. We were going into the cornfields. I was held clumsily at its side, my body smacking indifferently against its legs. I struggled to squeeze air down my throat. Each breath was a battle. I blinked back tears of pain and turned to see where the monster was taking me. As I did, I saw a flock of new birds rise from the fields. They cawed loudly, their great wings taking them high up into the sky. I saw them climb up to the heavens and soar towards the great faceless constructs of the black rock that jutted from the land like rotten teeth. When the murder of crows landed on top of one such surface, I noticed something I hadn't before. The protruding mass of rock sank, ever so slightly, back into the earth, and as it did, a great clinking rattle shook the sky. My eyes tore over to the hanging giant. It had descended by a fraction, bringing it closer towards the earth. And that's when pieces began to click in my mind. Fractured formations slowly taking shape in a form of grim understanding. Whatever this horrible place was, wherever it sat in the multitude of unknown nightmares, these birds were trying to free this titan in the sky. The jutting black rocks were some sort of counterweight to what the giant's chains were bound to. With each new flock of massive birds, the structure sank, bringing the chained monster in the sky closer to earth. But the birds, where did they come from? As this question shuddered through my mind, my captor reached the fields of endless crucifix. The wooden crosses rose around us as I stared at them with my bloodshot eyes. Now that I was closer, a new realization ripped through me like a bolt of lightning. The humans upon the crosses were changing. Pumpkins encasing their faces continued to fill with orange fluid that pumped down from the giant in the sky, and as they did so, I could see physical mutation beginning to blossom. With disgusted horror, I saw beaks protruding from the pumpkins, each at varying stages of growth. They jutted through the orange flesh, covered with neon ooze. As we continued to pass the crucified, I saw something I would never forget. A cluster of 3 crosses stood in a semicircle, and as we approached, the skin of the hanged people exploded with shocking violence. Emerging from the ruined remains were massive crows, unfurling and expanding to their full height. They screeched loudly and flapped their wings for the first time, taking flight and rising towards the great rock structures. Before I had time to process this new display of unsettling horror, the ogre was spinning me around, the world a blur of dull gray and green. The grip around my throat was temporarily removed, and I gasped, but only had time for a single breath before I was clutched around the waist. I was being raised. The creature pinned me against something, stretching me out above its head. My back slammed onto something, and I felt splinters of wood claw into my shirt. No. Oh, please no. The dawning horror of what was about to happen, I released a shriek of throat-tearing fear and pleading desperation. This monster was going to crucify me. I struggled frantically as the ogre held me up against the cross, splaying my arms with its massive, prodding fingers. Tears poured from my eyes as I watched it reach down and retrieve an enormous nail from a pouch on its waist. With the precision of a surgeon, the ogre drove it through my arm at the wrist. It happened in the blink of an eye, the beast mauling me with horrifying quickness. The pain was immediate and terrible. A rod of fire pinning me to the wooden crossbeam. Blood erupted from the punctured flesh and dripped lazily down my arm, soaking my clothes. Before I had time to recover, the ogre slammed another nail into my other arm. A cry shattered my vocal cord, and the world shook as my vision blurred, tears running down my face. Gasping, sobbing, I watched helplessly as this monster reached behind itself and retrieved a pumpkin from the colossal heap on its back. Through gritted teeth, I begged uselessly, watching as it raised its arms and prepared to bring it down over my head. But something stopped it. A sound soaring across the sky. Someone was screaming. A woman. I blinked away a tear and stared past the ogre. From his height, I gained a new perspective of the cornfield. Littering the land was a dozen of bulkheads, some closed, most open. Wandering out of them were dazed, confused people, sharing the same horrified wonder I had felt. The woman who was screaming stood a couple 100 yards away, watching as my captor nailed me to the cross. The ogre, one of many I now saw, all with mountains of pumpkins on their backs, turned to the woman. She took a step back, shrieking. Deciding that it could finish me later, it lumbered towards her, gritting through its mouthful of fragmented teeth. I turned away. Pain ran through me like currents of electricity. My pierced flesh boiled with constant pain. I looked at the nail driven through my skin and felt as if they would tear away, taking chunks with it. I needed to escape before the ogre came back to finish the job. It was hard to concentrate, and hard to think through the wall of pain that slammed into my senses with every beat of my heart. I rolled my head back against the wood, trying to steady my shuddering chest. I stared out at the field of crosses, my eyes bloodshot and moist, and then I squinted, the pain vanishing for a moment as I spotted something. It was a massive singular plate of iron, 100 yards in diameter. It rested on the surface of the earth, some sort of enormous vault or gate, and hinges the size of houses. It looked like a manhole, but the biggest one I've ever seen. Etched in black across the surface were 2 words, Christmas Land. It was nonsense to me, but something told me that whatever was happening here had something to do with that great covered hole. Get out, stop wasting time, and get out of this place, I thought, the pain returning in waves of furious violence. I looked at my impaled flesh one more time and prepared myself for the inevitable pain. I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth so hard that I could hear my jaw pop, and then I began to pull myself off the cross. A gory, bloody act of desperation and survival. I screamed until I tasted blood. I arched my back and pushed away from the cross with my feet, pulling my arms out and over the nails. With sickening fear, I felt myself pull free and plunge to the earth. I smacked onto the dirt and stars exploded in my head. I gasped, scrambling to my feet, fighting off a threatening blackout. I looked at my mangled wrist and winced and gagged. I tore my shirt into strips and bound my wounds as tightly as I could, stemming the flow of blood. And then I ran. I ran as hard and as fast as I had ever. Cornstalks whipping at my face as I plunged through them, tongues of heat licking my cheeks. I didn't slow. I didn't falter. I didn't wince. Hell was on my heels, and I know I didn't have long before it caught up. I snaked through the corn, heading back towards the bulkhead I emerged from, breath hissing from my lungs like gusts of hot steam. My head thundered, and I felt an inferno pulse through me with every heartbeat. I tripped, caught myself, and plunged forward. I could hear the great screech of the crows coming from the cornfields, a deafening cry louder than I've ever heard before. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and saw the sky go dark as a flock rose from the crosses. There had to be thousands of them, a mass of ungodly creations birthed from the bodies of the taken. They ascended as one and disappeared, settling on top of the gray stone towers. Still running, I saw them sink into the earth, and then the rattle of chains followed, an echo of massive iron. The Titan in the sky plunged to the earth, the counterweight releasing the final distance. The earth shook as I collapsed into the field, a rolling explosion of incredible power. The chains flew from its body like an eruption of shrapnel as I heard shards whistle overhead like cannonballs. As the monstrous giant made contact with the ground, the mammoth pumpkin around its head shattered, casting a hurricane of wet orange across the land. I stood up, knees trembling. The colossus being stood as well, a towering creature of massive proportions. Rising from its shoulders, previously hidden by the pumpkin, was the head of a crow. Its beak was like a scythe, a massive, dangerous thing that protruded from its black feathered face and two globe-like eyes. In elation, it raised its head to the heavens and screamed, a piercing, skull-splitting cry. The birds on the great stone structures echoed their god's call and took flight. Swarming down from the heights, they swirled around the thundering giant like a storm cloud, cawing and calling to their master. I tore my eyes from the terrifying spectacle and pressed on, new fear giving me the strength I needed to reach my destination. I felt the crow-headed giant lumbering behind me, its legs like pillars of quaking concrete that rattled the earth. Finally, desperately, mercifully, I found the bulkhead that I had first emerged from. The door stood open, inviting me back down into the long, dark hallway. Crying tears of relief, I took one last look over my shoulder. The Titan, along with its swarming congregation, was ripping open the immense hatch, the one that read, Christmas Land. With a roar of fury, it flung the iron cover away, tearing it from its hinges and flinging it like it was weightless. The crow god stared down into the gaping hole and let out a cry of rage and anger, so fierce I felt my bladder release. The great Titan got down on its knees and slithered inside. Roaring so loud, I felt pain split my skull. The flock of birds rallied around their master and dove down into the hole, screaming and cawing, as if lost in madness, as if they were going to war. I turned away, heart thundering, and sprinted down to the darkness of the bulkhead. My breath ripped past my lips as I bolted down the dark hallway, begging my body to stay conscious and in motion. Faintly, I spotted moonlight on the other end, dripping down from the dark sky to splash across concrete steps. I reached them and tore up them, exploding out into the familiar night. I didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't hesitate. My boots churned the earth as I fled back through the corn, back to my car, away from my nightmare called Corn Maze 44. I didn't have time to reflect on my horrifying experience until after I received medical attention from the hospital. I laid on a gurney, my arms stitched and bandaged. I lost a lot of blood, but somehow I managed to stay conscious until I came speeding into the nearest emergency room. My terrors I had seen clung to my mind like burning claws. They gripped my memory like an unflinching horror. What had that place been? Where had it been? What world had I stumbled on? Where had the crow god gone? And what was Christmas Land? I didn't have answers to these questions, and I knew I never would. If I spoke to others about my experience, I wouldn't be long for a madhouse. I wouldn't blame them. What I saw was impossible and held no place in reality. The only reason I, myself, haven't descended into total insanity is because of the last thing I saw before reaching my car. The only thing that assured me that I hadn't been hallucinating some horrific world. Something that made it real. It was the man in the plastic mask, clothed in red. because, you see, he was no longer man. He was one of those crows. And as I plunged through the last of the corn maze and stumbled to my car, I saw him, it, shred its robes away and spread its wings. But it didn't take flight into the starry sky. Instead, it burrowed into the earth, down to find its master in the tunnels of reality that ran unseen beneath the world.